Hello. I have recently had the genuine pleasure of spending time chatting with conceptual artist, sculptor, and world builder Johnny Fraser-Allen. Over the course of his amazing career, Johnny has been part of the Weta Workshop, working on movies like Steven Spielberg's BFG, Peter Jackson's King Kong, and both versions of The Hobbit. In more recent times, Johnny has developed a fully formed and immersive fantasy world inspired by fairy, folktales, Warhammer, and the work of Jim Henson. And let me tell you, this is an incredible world. During our fantastic conversation, Johnny and I talk about the design and model making effort that goes into crafting the greatest of fantasy movies. A lifetime spent in unparalleled world building immersion, and a load of hilarious stories as well. I'm Jordan. This is Jordan Sorcery, and today I have the privilege of being in conversation with Johnny Fraser-Allen. Hi, Johnny. Thank you so much for joining me to talk to me about your career in film and in miniatures design and creation of games and stuff. I wonder
Thanks,
if you'd
Jordan.
like.
It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry, I'm already talking over you.
That's
I,
all right.
I just it's like being on my favorite TV show, really, because you're like the third main reason I use YouTube for now. It's the good thing about people like you. It's like uh, television shows would probably not fund or run a show that as a guy who doing a deep delve into you know the makings of games, but it's the only TV show I want to watch, and so um streaming your content while I'm designing for my next project and stuff like that. I mean, I'd waited for ages for a deep dive into Hero Quest, which is how I discovered you. Basically, it's like, has someone done a making of Hero Quest yet? I need some content while I'm drawing, and then that comes out. Oh, who's this guy? And then man, you're prolific in what you deliver, since you started only 6 months ago. And but then what I'm really loving now, we talked a little bit about before, was the interviews you're getting with like people that, to people like me, are the rock stars, uh, and just hearing creative people speak creatively, while it's the best thing you can put on while I work as a designer. And I mean, the 17 plus years I worked at Weta, but if you go through New Zealand for a gig or for a movie, you always get taken through Weta. So, and if you back in those days, if you get taken through Weta, because every project you had to sign an NDA, and we couldn't show what was going to happen in Avatar 4 or whatever's happening, Richard would usually bring people to my desk because it was full of the Gloaming, which was non-IP or Warner Brothers specific or whatever, and I was happy to talk to people. But so we, I've had in-depth conversations about goblins with uh, Beckham and Tom Cruise and Prince Charles. And it's like, oh, they're nice. That was cool. But then the Perry brothers come through, and it's and you Beatles out over it, and they're coming through a place and they're seeing some of their heroes, and then some punk kid is going, the Berry Twins, and that grew into an amazing experience where I went and stayed with them in Nottingham, and they took me to Games Workshop for my first time many years ago. And um, anyway, so I'm just saying, so watching the interviews that you've managed to collate on your channel is it's exactly the show that I've been waiting for. So thank you for providing me with a whole bunch of content for me to design to.
Well, thank you, Johnny. I mean, it sounds like I've I've requested you to introduce me at the start of the interview. So, well, that's very, very
Yeah.
kind of you to say. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned there a few things that I think we'll get into, right? So you've had a fascinating career. You've worked at Weta. You've created the Gloaming. You've done lots of really interesting stuff and worked with some really interesting people in some interesting places. What was the sort of start of your journey with, I guess, art? Maybe let's start there, and then how you got into film from that.
Well, yeah, the two absolute pillars of what shaped me and created me and led me down an artistic channel. But when I say artistic, everything to me, I didn't always know it was this, but now the language I've learned to put around it is world building. And my fascination with world building came from, the ages of 5 and 6, from the same source. And those two things were basically Labyrinth and Hero Quest. And my older cousin James, who I idolized, and we grew up in Auckland, New Zealand, and he lived in Christchurch, and he wasn't even my cousin. He was mum and dad's best friend's son, sort of thing. But there was Auntie Sharon, Uncle George, and cousin James, and it was always such a thrill to go and visit them, because mum and dad had a great time with their best friends, and I'm hanging out with cousin James. And when I was 5, in the same night, he showed me Labyrinth and Dark Crystal taped off the television on VHS, and it just absolutely warped my brain. It's funny, like I had a great childhood, so I'm always fascinated at how desperately early on how obsessed I've always been with escapism. Like, I wasn't running away from any horrible situation, but the fantasy worlds, like, I grew up in the height of the action figure bonanza, and my obsessions were how I could get the full range of He-Man or Thundercats or Dino Riders or Ninja Turtles or Toxic Crusaders, for some reason, was a kid show. But I every day of my life, I was physically holding a monster. Really fantastically creatively designed monsters, because it was adults' jobs in America to come up with the most ridiculous next toy, because they keep selling more, they've got to design more. Let's try if that works. And so these monsters got more and more ridiculous, to the point where you're actually making a cartoon show for kids out of Toxic Crusader, or RoboCop and Police Academy and all these adult movies, just so they could make toys. And I was eating it up. But anyway, yeah. So a couple years after Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, you go back to cousin James's house, and he had a Sega, and one of the other main inspirations for the Gloaming is the first level of Jurassic Park and Sega, where you're Alan Grant, and it's just that endless forest, and you're going up and down the branches. I just love that endless forest world. But anyway, then he introduced me to Hero Quest, and I just, like, again, the tactility. I mean, I don't need to explain to you or your viewers what makes Hero Quest so magical. There's already 30-minute videos all over YouTube, because I could speak for an hour and 30 minutes of what that game does to me. But just the door it opened creatively, because again, this is before YouTube or streaming, or we didn't have a game console or anything. There was the fact that there was this tactile board game where one piece of cardboard that represented a door changed an entire landscape in your imagination. And then when you replaced that door with an open door, and things started happening in that room with these beautiful models and the color palette and how well designed it was. And I hadn't discovered, I'm 7 or 8 at this point. I hadn't discovered Lord of the Rings yet, and what a huge part that would play in my life later on, and how much time I've spent in Middle Earth now, in my adult life and as a conceptual designer. But as a kid, my first introduction to orcs and goblins was, and in some ways, outside of the movie Willow, which I would have seen before Hero Quest. And maybe that's possibly why Hero Quest absolutely captured me so much, because I was already so obsessed with the movie Willow. But that Sword and Sorcery was so, it grabbed me so instantly and consumed me, and I've never got sick of it. It's only grown. It's the parasite that is fantasy to me has fully taken over the vessel, But yeah, Hero Quest, Dark Crystal, absolutely. But there's something, I always say Labyrinth. When I say Labyrinth, I feel like I'm saying both of those movies. Then, of course, there's also Jim Henson's Storyteller, which I feel is like the third in that perfect Jim Henson creative triangle of the Trinity. I mean, of absolute perfect, has not been beaten since. I still can't wrap my head around why Avatar is such a blockbuster and Dark Crystal didn't do well at the cinema. what 20 years prior to. I'm not even saying I dislike Avatar, but I just mean like they did it so much better with like puppets, without pixels. But yeah, anyway, so I guess again the key there is world building. Like Jim Henson opened my mind to world building, and then a couple years later, after a couple years of obsession with fantasy and world building, and taking the only way I could really achieve that as a kid was by trying to redraw Ninja Turtles or whatever. But I could build my own worlds by having Skeletor interact with the Ninja Turtles, or Lion-O start fighting the Cobras and the G.I. Joes inside my Sylvanian mansion. Like I could create different worlds in my own movies with physical tactile things, while my drawing skills were still developing. But then HeroQuest was this way of I think that was my introduction to becoming an active participant in the fantasy worlds that you got to be involved with. And I've really discovered that now in my adult life, with my current love for the game Star Wars Legion, because I love Star Wars more, but as much as I do, basically because it's more fantasy than science fiction. It's Dungeons and Dragons in space, right? And so I still think of it as more fantasy than science fiction. But anyway, and I spent a lot of time making terrain to play Star Wars Legion in, because everything has to be perfect, because I think I'm almost on the spectrum in terms of what I need on my tabletop. But what was I saying about Star Wars? Oh yeah, so when I'm a kid, when I want to replicate the Battle of Hoth, I've got one snowtrooper. My Han Solo is from Return of the Jedi, not Empire Strikes Back anyway. I'm using the couch as echo base. And once you set it up and go, this is going to be my Saturday, you're still going, pew, pew. Oh, I guess he's dead. But because there's no real rule system. But what a game like Star Wars Legion does, what makes me feel like such a big kid when I play it, is now I can replicate basically the film. I've got hundreds of miniatures on a table. I've built Echo Base, and there's a rule system, so I don't feel like a total idiot just going, no, that one's dead, bang bang. And and now there's also strategy to the play, because it is play, and we are playing with toys. You can call them models or whatever, but toys isn't a dirty word. Play isn't negative. It's great that which takes me back to this one comment that I love. And the first big video I did with Adam Savage, where I revealed my massive kind of Hagglethorn Hollow setup in the studio that I'd spent all this time on, and like, it's a video about Adam Savage, a creative guy, interviewing another creative guy's creative passion, right? So what you get when you click on that video and you watch it, right?
Yeah.
And then first came out, I hadn't been on YouTube before, and I was just interested to see, do people like Hagglethorn Hollow? Because I don't know. And all these really positive comments, and like, oh, that's really heartwarming. Oh, everyone likes this. Oh, the people. But then there's just this one comment, which was, look at this man-child. This is what happens when your country hasn't had a decent war for 30 years. And I loved it, because it's like, and he's saying that very negatively, but I'm like, yes, this is what happens when your country hasn't had a decent war for 30 years. Like, you can have these men children celebrating. Like, all I do now for a living is what I tried to do and failed my entire childhood. Because when I tried to make, I tried to make the Ninja Turtle sewer playset out of cardboard, and it was okay, but it was a kid made a cardboard fort. I tried to make Endor in the garden out of the trees we had in the backyard, and in my head it was going to be amazing. And I just always remember feeling like, oh, this kind of sucks. I had such bigger thoughts, and so I've spent my whole life finally getting to the point where I can create what I was trying to create when I was like 7 or 8.
That's incredible.
And it's not that I'm a big kid, and I don't feel stupid for that. I'm quite happy that
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, as you say, that passion and bringing it to life and being able to take all of these amazing inspirations and turn that into something brand new, I think that is definitely something to be celebrated. And it's lovely that you can sort of take those kinds of comments and draw from those the joy, like you're drawing joy from all the childhood experiences as well. So how did you go from playing with all of these toys then to being able to express yourself through that art and through the sort of things that you were creating on the page?
Well, for many years, Weta Workshop has a tour, and you can go through it. And to supplement my wages, because I took I stopped doing so much paid work at Weta to focus on the gloaming, because I became obsessed with this passion project. But that wasn't driven by me wanting to earn money, because I was broke all through my 20s and 30s because of basically the gloaming. And so Richard Taylor would who runs Weta set up this stage for people like me, young, and you don't need to be young, but enthusiastic employees he had that were doing their thing, could sit on the stage, and every 30 minutes the tour guide would end with, like, and this is one of the workers at Weta. What are you working on, Johnny? And sometimes I might be sculpting Hoggle for Alessio Cavatore, or sometimes I'd be sculpting a Middle-earth guinea pig sculpture for Richard, who's obsessed with guinea pigs, and that's a whole kettle of fish there. And a lot of the times I was sculpting gloaming stuff. But anyway, nearly one person in every group of 30 would always say, "Oh, you've got a gift," and I'm sitting there smiling, wondering why that really annoyed me. And they'd ask me about it, and I had to kind of answer to that so many times that through talking about it out loud, I kind of really got to terms and figured out how I became an artist. And I don't personally believe in fate or a destiny or a higher power, or you're born with a gift or anything. And so processing all of that, I kind of realized that, well, at the end of the day, growing up, a chubby, asthmatic, flat-footed, kid, my older brother, who grew up into, a human man-sized body, where I was only ever going to be a halfling. Like, when he went and played sports, it felt good, and he scored the goal, and people would, but sports for me was uncomfortable. No one ever passed me the ball, and I was always a Saturday wasted, where I should be watching X-Men or He-Man. It's like I missed out what Wolverine did that week because I've got to be in the cold playing a game that I'm forced to play. So I hated sport, right? But and so that alone, just my physical build, made me enjoy drawing at a table more than running around outside. And because I did that more, I got better at it. And the better I got, the more people would say, "Hey, that's good, Johnny. Look at," and but that's part of it. And then the other part of it is the fact that it's so tied to the fact that there is something in me, on the other side of this coin, that because again, my older brother, he grew up, he watches rugby games, and he works at a bank, and he's a normal dude. He watched Labyrinth and Dark Crystal the same night as I did, and he was like, "Yeah, that's good, whatever." For me, so okay, my world's either over, has just begun, whatever. Like, James showed him Hero Quest as well. It's like, what are these? Okay, what's a dwarf? You know what I mean? He's not interested. So there is obviously something in me, that just was so drawn to the fantastical elements. And again, like, we didn't have a computer game console, and I wasn't a huge reader at that early stage of childhood. I didn't even know there was a world of fantasy books out there. I think my first experience with a kind of a fantasy book was Tales from Jabba's Palace, and that really got me actually reading more, because it's like, oh, it's like there's another Star Wars movie that I can have in my head, because there's only 3 of them, which is the way it should have stayed. No, but yeah. And so I think the more I drew, and the more I playing with toys and monsters was a way for me to world build, and drawing was a way for me to world build. But so I've drawn every day of my life. I don't think it was the first time I actually drew something and it felt like exactly what was in my head, and I thought, oh, I'm finally there. I think I was about 21, and I was drawing my version of Dolores Umbridge, who was my favorite Harry Potter character, before she was cast in a movie, and my vision of it was changed. So I remember being 14, reading The Lord of the Rings, and then seeing a little bit of the amazing Ralph Bakshi animation, and in my head, I like the I'd kind of cast Aragorn as Timothy Dalton, but now he was always voiced as John Hurt, which isn't a bad thing because it's the best voice ever. But it was always so I was desperately trying to read the book before because my perception of it was altered by someone else's vision of what Lord of the Rings was. And that kind of experience has been across the board a lot of the time with my designing experience. Like I just I designed all of the goblins and creatures and magics for Jim Henson's Portable Door recently, and they sent me the script, but I didn't read it. Because one, I hate spoilers, and I wanted to enjoy the movie, and two, it's like, you know, I feel like I was hired because of what I think goblins should look like, you know, and I kind of didn't really want any notes from the script, you know, and I felt more liberated for that, and I felt I'd kind of reached a point in my life and my career where I didn't really need to read the script, and I'm there as a conceptual designer, and the script is for the actors and the production designer, and not me. But then there's other cases when I was working on Steven Spielberg's BFG, where it was amazing. My concept of Mark Rylance as the BFG is the one Spielberg chose, right? And so like if you look at that situation externally, you know, if you told 8-year-old Johnny who walked out of Hook and told it for his 8-year-old birthday party and told all of his friends that one day I'm going to work for Spielberg, if you told that kid that he designed the title character for his fantasy Spielberg movie, he'd implode like the house in Poltergeist, you know. But the reality of the situation is you find out that in a note in an email, and you never really interact with Spielberg. You know what I mean? But then you know, I've also watched, because it was on the server, I watched a meeting with Weta Digital where he was saying, no, you stop straying off it. It's got to look exactly like this illustration. And he's never saying has to look like Johnny's illustration or I love this kid's work or whatever. For him, it's just a drawing. I'll never meet him. If I did, he wouldn't know who I was. But you know, but at the same time, it's like, well, I designed the BFG, but that's not what it's like. Sure. And I think in some ways there's something lost. And that's not at the fault of Weta either. That's just, you know, Weta was a guns for hire by whatever studio, blah blah blah. They have this many people on the team. Everyone kind of designed different giants. I designed, and everyone's putting in designs for all the giants, and some one of them's got to get chosen. I like Flesh Lump Eater, who is the main bad guy in that movie. I designed as a Maid Masher concept based on Tom Waits, and Spielberg chose that one to be the main giant, and then I had to redesign it a little bit when Jermaine Clement got cast because he needed to have kind of gooier, fatter lips like Jermaine Clement and stuff. So little things happen like that. But the design journey is different with every director. I don't know how I got on this tangent.
No, it's interesting. But so mechanically then, are you just given a brief then? So like for the Portable Door, they would just say, right, we need 20 different goblin designs. We need something that looks like this, something that looks like that. And you just...
It's different. So I wasn't even a film designer anymore when Portable Door came along. In fact, working on Alessio Calvatore's Labyrinth board game kind of opened the door to Portable Door for me, if you will, Jordan. Because also that's another thing. Well, hold on, I'll keep spiraling around. I can't keep one thought on my brain all the time. But so my dear friend Steve Boyle was hired as the makeup designer for Portable Door, and he's the genius that worked on Black Sheep and Under the Mountain. He does all the makeups for the Spielberg Brothers movie, like that one where Daybreakers, where Willem Dafoe and Uma Thurman's husband, Ethan Hawke,
sure,
vampires, you know, and they all. So he's an amazing makeup artist. Does this amazing stuff. And we had a couple months working together on miniatures and King Kong. I had 2 years on King Kong, but there was a couple months where he was in the miniatures department with me, and you know, we just got on famously. And that was so many years ago, and we've always talked about working on a project since. And then so he gets this gig, and so I designed. No, I had sculpted all of the miniatures and designed all of the illustrations for the Jim Henson Labyrinth board game for Alessio, which is a whole nother story. And Jim Formanak, who was running the licensing department of Henson's at that time, I got on really well with him. And there was this TV show that I guess I can't really talk about that Jim Henson's put together, and he said they'd tried a couple designers and it hadn't worked, and so he said, "Why don't we try Johnny Fraser-Allen?" And so he asked me so I spent a couple of months designing every creature in a TV show for the Jim Henson Company, like to a storyteller level, and I couldn't believe it. But then, like honestly, 3 of every 4 projects I've ever worked on in 20 years kind of get shelved. Like I don't know if it was a year or more. I can't remember how long we spent on Guillermo Del Toro's Hobbit, the best creative work I've ever done in my life, and I will legally never be able to show anyone. But and so this was just one of those projects that got shelved. But when it came time to Portable Door, Henson's knew of my diligent, excitable creature work, and Steve Boyle was also head of the creature shop, and they approached me to do the job, and I'm like, the best movie, the best creative, the best feat of creative imagination ever put onto cinema is the movie Labyrinth, right? The second best movie ever made is Jurassic Park, and you want me to turn Sam Neill into a goblin and pay me to do it? I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a career highlight. I'm gonna take that gig. And this was over 2 years ago, and I'm not kidding. I'm still suffering quite badly from RSI because I was working 7 days a week, 16-hour days, not because they asked me to, but because everything I did, the director of it, Jeffrey Walker, first equal best director I've ever worked with next to Guillermo, that he really knows how to work with an artist. He was so excited and passionate, made sure I was involved in all the production meetings and knew everyone and was so engaging. But he also just like, it was one of these things. It was very much like working with Guillermo in the sense that like anything I did is like, oh, it's great, man. It's in the film. And so the more I did, the more approvals I got. And it just brought out the best in me. And I couldn't give enough of myself to the project. And so I started ignoring all the signs of like like the little piano strings going ping 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 in my wrist, and I'm still recovering from it, but it's not a complaint. That's just illustrating how exciting it was when you work on the right project. And it's nice to know, like, because any job can become a job. Like I said, like I remember getting bored sometimes working on Tintin, thinking, Johnny, you're one of the 5 lead kind of designers on a Spielberg movie, but like I was always an Asterix guy. My brother was Tintin, Anyway, but it's like a job can still become a job, but it's nice that when one comes along that you're thrilled about, like it's nice to know that the industry hasn't killed that part of me yet. It's come close, like especially running the tabletop gaming business side of things. Now that I've left film, it's so much work, and it's a lot of pressure. And just the other day I was complaining to Stacey at how old I was looking because of it, and then last night we were watching The Professor and the Madman, which has like Mel Gibson in it as an elderly Oxford professor, and she's like, yeah, see, you look like that. I'm like, Stacey, that's a 70-year-old lifelong alcoholic. It's like I'm not even in my 40s yet. But yeah, but if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it is an incredible amount of work, and you mentioned sort of giving yourself to that project and how much you have to invest in a project. You also mentioned there the Guillermo del Toro, The Hobbit. So because you worked on both versions of that set of movies, right? So you were working on the del Toro version and then onto the subsequent
And then on
version?
Peter's. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it goes back to the question I still haven't answered because of all my tangents of how I kind of got there. So I at 14 I discovered Tolkien, and I was and which was around the same age I mean, I knew of HeroQuest from being a kid, but when I was about 15, a girlfriend gave me a mint copy of HeroQuest for my birthday, because this was before eBay or internet shopping. I couldn't find it, right? But she'd won it from the library as a kid, and she was like, "I don't want to play this crap. Do you want this game?" And I'm like, "Do you know what this is?" And she's like, "No, that's why I'm giving it to you." I'm like, I couldn't believe I was getting this mint copy of HeroQuest, and it changed me. And it's the first time I painted miniatures, and that was my gateway drug into Warhammer, because I needed more of that plastic crack, and that was back when Warhammer still looked very much like HeroQuest. I mean, I still love the look of those orcs, and I could buy more plastic orcs and paint those up, and then that's what got me into making scenery. But I didn't. Well, there weren't YouTube channels like mine or yours, or people making fantastic content. I had a couple pictures out of the couple of white dwarfs that I could afford, and like, how do I make that? And I had to guess how I made it, you know. And so I made pretty crappy terrain, but then I'd shoot movies with that terrain, because as a teenager I made movies in high school and stuff, and a lot of that terrain went into my folio to get into Weta, and even though it wasn't great, because I was multidisciplined and interested in making terrain, I got my job. I was applying for a conceptual designer, but you know, because I'll get to that in a sec. I'm just trying to do it in order, right?
Sure.
And so I'm 14. I discovered Tolkien, and I was at an all-boys Catholic secondary school in New Zealand, which is another way of saying prison. And I was the only kid at school reading Lord of the Rings, and this was before the films. And obviously, Lord of the Rings was a big thing, but I didn't know anybody that knew about it, and I really felt like it was my thing, which is ridiculous now. But as a teenager, when you have your thing, it's so important to you, you know. And it really felt like my thing. And I Smoke Free, which are like a branch of New Zealand that pay to kind of make smoking look bad, which, as they should, which is great. Paid my school to pay an artist to paint a smoke-free mural, so it's still there to this day, 30 years later or whatever. But I painted the massive wall on the school of all my favorite Tolkien characters smoking a pipe, and I just painted the Hobbit under it, but it actually looks like a promotion for smoking. But anyway, so hold on, I set my dog out. Right. Anyway, so like, obsessed with Lord of the Rings and everything, and then like and then one day I'm like 15 or 16, and Dad brings home the newspaper, and it says, and obviously I was familiar with Peter Jackson because I wanted to be a director, because in my head, but I was obsessed with world building, and I didn't know I didn't know to call it world building yet, right? But I thought the highest thing, the pinnacle of world building, was being a director, was being a Steven Spielberg, like, because he's the guy that is the I don't want to use the word God, but the, you know,
Because he's the driving force behind it, right?
Force of the vision, you know. And so I ever since I was 5, I wanted to be a Spielberg, right? And so obviously I was hugely aware of Peter Jackson, because wow, New Zealand has a Spielberg. And I loved The Frighteners. It's still one of my favorite movies. And it's like, oh my God, a New Zealand Spielberg made us. I mean, that, you know, I mean, that movie was written for Robert Zemeckis, who was basically the apprentice of Spielberg. Spielberg made Zemeckis, and then Zemeckis helped make Peter Jackson. The trickle down effect of Spielberg's genius, and Poltergeist being the secret, not directed by Steven Spielberg movie, even though it was directed by Steven Spielberg. You know, like, we suddenly had a New Zealand Poltergeist, which is every bit as good as that movie. It's a fantastic film. And so like I was really interested in Peter Jackson. At the same time, I was really interested in Lord of the Rings. At the same time, I was absolutely obsessed with creature features and special effects. The makings of movies were always more interesting than the movies to me. And this was just at the dawn of DVDs. So suddenly DVDs were coming out, and every movie that I ever loved suddenly had an hour-and-a-half documentary to them that I could never see before. All of this was happening at the same time and smacking me around. The day my dad brought home a newspaper that said, "Oh, they're making Lord of the Rings in New Zealand," and in the picture was Ian McKellen. Now, at the same time, I was also this is embarrassing, but I was the country's top student Shakespeare actor, because basically because I was obsessed with Richard III, right? And I'd just been Richard III in the school play or something. I'm trying to not muddle up my timelines, but and so I was obsessed with Ian McKellen, who just made this amazing contemporary Richard III movie, and and Ian McKellen was Gandalf, and so all of my passions in my life just kind of went into this newspaper article, and that's the newspaper article I read that Weta Effects are doing this, and that's the first time that I learned that I knew about New Zealand's Spielberg called Peter Jackson, but I didn't know we had our own Phil Tippett, right? I didn't know New Zealand had its own Rick Baker, Stan Winston in the form of Richard Taylor and Weta Workshop. I mean, I guess they made some of the ghosts somewhere in The Frighteners, but even though The Frighteners is an amazing, fantastical movie, it's not packed with creature features. It is actually packed with a huge amount of special effects from Weta, but the movies, it doesn't dwell on them. It doesn't feel like Jabba's palace. It's not a creature feature, and so I had Weta on my, and so from the age 14, 15, I just decided I'm going to work at Weta, and so every the several schools, the high schools that I went through and got kicked out of and moved on to, and I just turned every single class, every art class. I failed all of them because I tried to turn every single class into how I can build my folio for Weta Workshop. I took sculpting, painting, design, photography, everything, and I tried to make I tried to change the curriculum in every class, and teachers don't like that apparently. But by the end of it, I had created, I had no school qualifications, but I had the folio that I needed to get to Richard Taylor. And then this is where it gets interesting, because I didn't, the internet existed, but I didn't really know what it was or have it, right? I didn't know about emails. And my brain doesn't, still to this day, doesn't really work like how I see regular people's brains work. Like the ways to reach Richard Taylor that I probably could have reached him just weren't on my radar, and I had no idea how to find this man now that I'd built this folio. And a lot of that folio, by the way, I threw out and started again once the Fellowship of the Ring special features came out, and you've got Richard Taylor for 9 hours talking you through how they made Lord of the Rings and how they designed the Fighting Uruk-hai, and I'm just like absorbing this all in, going like, tell me, and so like so I'm hearing Richard talk about, we designed the Rohirrim 30 different times for Peter and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, multiple designs, okay, that's amazing. And so I just gave myself a brief, and I took The Wizard of Oz, which is a universal language, really. Like everybody knows The Wizard of Oz, even if you hadn't read the book, Frank Miller's book. And so I just took like 10 characters from The Wizard of Oz, and I designed each of them 3 completely different times. And between that and like the Mordheim city I'm building and out of like polystyrene in mum's garage, and a couple shots of the fantasy movies that I'd made rubber masks for at high school, that was my folio. But and then how do I get this to Richard? And I'd saved up all of my pizza restaurant pocket money to go see David Bowie when he came to Wellington. And I was just about to, buy the tickets, because I had to fly to Wellington and get a hotel and buy the actual concert ticket. And then that's when I heard that Viggo Mortensen was having a photography show that you could buy a ticket to in Wellington. And it was right at the end of Return of the King wrapping up. And I just knew everyone was going to be there for it. And I like Viggo, what a great actor. And, from everything I hear, a wonderful man. But I didn't really have a lot of interest in his fantastic photography. I just realized I had this Bowie money saved up. And since 5, I needed to see David Bowie. I'm actually like I'm the result of my teenage birth parents meeting at a David Bowie concert at the 1983 Serious Moonlight concert. So he's been this weird form in my life guiding my path, Anyway, so and I just made this decision. I'm going to spend my Bowie money to go to this Vigo art show so I can see Richard Taylor. And I go there, and everyone but Richard Taylor is there, and and lucky he wasn't there. Like, you want to go to your mate's show and some kids going, "Look at my folio," but I don't know how else to make it. But it was funny, like all my heroes are there, and having a chat to people, and I go up to Brian Sibley, who's a Tolkien scholar, and he's in some of the DVDs, and I'm like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Sibley." He's like, "Who are you?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm nobody. I'm just a fan." And he goes, "Nobody's ever recognized me." And then he takes me by the arm, and he's like, "Alan Lee, have you met my friend Johnny? Elijah, have you met my good friend Johnny?" And it was, and so like my head was like, as a teenager who just absolutely, like, Fellowship of the Ring for me was like the same effect as Labyrinth at 5. It was, okay, the game's changed again. It took that long for a movie to be as life-changing as Labyrinth, but it really was. Well, I mean, Jurassic Park was up there, but it really was with Fellowship of the Ring, and absolutely obsessed with those movies. And now I'm meeting a lot of the people that were in them and created them and stuff. And I said, well, Richard wasn't there, and I missed Bowie, but that was a really nice experience. And then went to my hostel, and then the next day I flew out of Wellington, and then I'm at the airport, and I'm reading the book, which was Christopher Tolkien's edited appendices of the Treason of Isengard. And I realized, oh God, I'm going to be late for my plane. And I'm running across the airport, and I see Richard Taylor. There used to be an octopus in a tank at the airport in in Wellington, and he's there with his little son, Sam, who's now twice as tall as me and studying engineering. He's a great kid. And anyway, but he's this little toddler, and he's talking to this woman who's looking at him like, what is this man talking about? And he's going, this is the same octopus we based Watcher in the Water on from Fellowship of the Ring. And she didn't know what he was talking about. But I'm like, oh, do I miss my flight? Or do I talk to Richard? And I'm like, here's the whole reason I'm here. I'll figure out how to fly home, and so I'm like, hi, Richard. Look, all I want to do is work at Weta. I've been working on this folio. Do you have any hints or tips? And the gracious man that he is, he's telling me all these great hints and tips and blah 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 blah. And I'm standing there in my favorite special feature, listening to New Zealand's own Phil Tippett. And to me, like, kids grow up idolizing Michael Jordan or Michael Jackson, but like for me, it was Phil Tippett, Ralph McQuarrie, Brian Froud, and Jim Henson. Like, they were my sport and rock stars, and so now I'm talking to the New Zealand Jim Henson, and he's the thing. But this is Richard Taylor, right? He says, look, when you're finished, when I impersonate him, I can't help but it, and it's done out of such love, in the same way that I would impersonate, like, Michael Caine or some other huge lovable character, But it's like, here's my card. When you finished your folio, don't send it up, bring it up, right? And then it's a huge story of how I actually even got to sit in front of him, because what had happened is Return of the King had just finished. I'm trying to abbreviate it. Return of the King had just finished, and every single person on planet Earth wanted a bit of Richard Taylor, because he was this huge success that had just taken every Oscar out of the Oscars and come home with them, and so he went from under the radar to being the central point of all radars, and I just couldn't. His receptionists were told not to let people through to him, especially nobody kids. I'm on their side, of course. I don't feel like bad juju over that. But after months and months of calling, I called back on the last time, and then I was going to go, okay, I guess I'm not going to work in film anymore. And on that last time, it just so happens that it was like, okay, can you come up Monday? I'm like, yeah, I'll be there Monday. And anyway, so I show up and I show him my folio, and he goes through every single page and gives me really realistic feedback on my stuff. And he says, like, what's amazing about your folio is that you've designed all these different characters 3 different times. Nobody does that, which is great, because I learned it from him and from watching his special features. And then he also was actually really taken by the Mordheim city that I'd built, because he's like, well, we've got a miniatures department, and I love that you're interested in all these disciplines. It's like, we're just starting miniatures on King Kong at the moment. It's like, I'll level with you. You're not good enough to be in the design room at the moment. But if you want to start on King Kong in the miniatures department, I'd be happy for you to build up your skills and work your way up to the design room. So I'm a teenager sitting there asking to be on the most creative team of people to ever sit in one room on the planet Earth since Sid Mead and Ralph McQuarrie designed Star Wars. You know what I mean? But I always dream big, and I've always said, like, my one superpower is utter naivety. It's got me to so many places I never would have got if I was smarter. Anyway, so, and look, it got me through the doors at Weta, and so for 6 months I'm carving life-size dinosaur bones out of polystyrene. Just bathing in chemicals, thinking I'm the luckiest little boy ever. And then a year and a half basically working on every single one of the 65 miniatures of Skull Island. There are more miniatures in King Kong than the 3 Lord of the Rings movies put together.
Wow.
And there isn't a single one in The Hobbit because of where digital technology had come from, and that. So now I'm a war gamer going from I wish I had more resources to make better terrain, to having access to the rock that they made Rivendell and Minas Tirith and Helm's Deep out of, right? and scraps of it that are going in the dumpster because they're not big enough for like a warehouse-sized bit of Skull Island that Kong's going to run over for 3 seconds and you're not going to look at because you're obviously going to be looking at the monkey. Anyway, but it was great paid work, So I'm now, like, in my weekends and after work and in my lunch breaks, I'm making this terrain to supplement my games of Battles in Middle-earth, which I was obsessively collecting and painted every miniature of. So now I've got this great, Middle-earth terrain happening, and to be honest, and then so every single night and every single weekend for about 2 years, I'd go home and just continue to develop my conceptual design skills. And once a week, I'd take them to Richard, and so between the fact that I just kept showing that I wanted to be a conceptual designer, and the fact that, according to Richard, I have the highest accident and emergency rate in the New Zealand film industry, he gave me a job in the design room because, one, he liked my persistence, and two, he said it's the only place in the building where I can't cut myself anymore. And I wasn't doing it for attention. I legitimately was cutting myself open quite a lot. But 50 hours a week for 2 years, holding a Tajima, cutting stuff, it's statistically, I wasn't cutting myself that often, but I got taken to hospital quite a few times. It wasn't funny after a while. One of them was nearly fatal. But anyway, so I end up. So my first design gig, Richard lets me design on Prince Caspian, and I'm a strict Middle-earth man myself, but Narnia is Narnia. At least there's monsters in it. I'll take it, and and that's where I kind of broke my teeth in the design room, and the thing is like the opportunity that someone like Richard gives someone like me who's hungry for it. I went from doing pretty shoddy work that you won't see anywhere, online on purpose for Prince Caspian, and not getting a single hit on that movie, to getting hit after hit after hit on Steven Spielberg's Tintin on the next one, because I got that opportunity to brush my skills up on the job on Prince Caspian, and now Spielberg's rubber stamping characters of mine for a Tintin movie, and that comes from the mindset of someone like Richard, who is a man that created a company that gives opportunities. To this day, I don't think he knows how many high schools I failed, because the academia on paper of no importance to him, but he said on the day as well, like, I'm hiring you based on your enthusiasm, and you can build your skills up, but you can't. He believes, and I do too. You can't do it the other way around. You can't get a really talented person and train them to be passionate and enthusiastic. I've met people that like are more talented than I'll ever be in my life, but and this isn't a judgment. I'm just saying like that they'll go home after a day's work and just turn on the PlayStation or you know or the television, and it always reminds me of that scene in Game of Thrones where they've tied up Hodor outside Craster's Keep, and Rasp, I think he's called, but they're all kicking him, and it's like, if I was as big as you, I'd be king of the world. And I see that with some people's talent, you know, it's like, man, if I could do what you could do, I'd be king of the world. But like, I won't be as good as you in 50 years. But you gotta, you know, you just, I guess if you're hungry for it, it's yeah. Well, I can't stop. I couldn't stop anyway. Like, I feel physically ill when I'm not being creative, so it helps that there was, for the first 17 years of my career anyway, someone like Richard who provided me a safe space that wasn't an asylum, you know, to be able to express that level of creativity and grow as an artist and a person. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so what was
Yeah.
the timeline then? So you've come in and you've worked on Prince Caspian. You've moved from Kong, where you were doing the physical sort of model making, to Caspian for your conceptual design,
Caspian, and then
Tintin.
Tintin. And
Where
the
was
whole time,
after that?
this is 5 years of probably go by, 5 long years, and from day one of getting to Weta, like the first day I was there, I was carving polystyrene under the 3 stone trolls and the animatronic tree bed, while down the other end they were finishing off the miniature that unleashes all of the skulls in Dunharrow, City of the Dead, that was going to get plugged into the extended DVD scene of Return of the King. You know, when the stupid amount of skulls kind of fall out. You know,
Right.
And so like Return of the King was wrapping up, but from that day up until all, you know, Tintin years and years later, in my mind anyway, it was a long time ago, I'm trying to remember here, but I definitely fear, I was always like it seemed like any day now they're going to do the Hobbit, right? Because everyone was waiting for the Hobbit. And I think Weta itself, as a facility that relies on big fantasy projects to keep their people employed, was waiting for the Hobbit. But obviously, it was tied up in legality licensing nightmare with, I think it was Souls Ants owned the rights or something. The Hobbit was different, obviously, to the Lord of the Rings, and it was, I can't remember now, but it took so long to get the right deal, to get the rights to make the movie back, blah blah blah. But anyway, by this point, obviously, I mean, you can see in the special features how exhausted poor old Peter is. He's no one's filmed films three films back to back, and I can see why no one has or ever will. You know, he's absolutely bet down, and so obviously you've got to make the Hobbit, and obviously if someone's going to make the Hobbit, it has to be the people that made the Lord of the Rings and reinvented the way you make fantasy films. And but if, in the same way that George Lucas felt he needed to bring in Irvin Kershner to direct Empire Strikes Back so he could focus on the bigger picture of what Star Wars was, I guess Peter did the same thing. But it's like, you're not just going to get anyone in, right? But who's the next biggest fantasy director after Peter at the time? And it was Guillermo Del Toro. I think the problem there is you don't become the current biggest fantasy director of all time by not sticking to your own creative vision. You know what I mean? Like Guillermo is an absolute force of nature, and they both have very, very different directing styles. And the year spent on Guillermo as a conceptual designer, the year spent on Guillermo's Hobbit versus the year spent on Peter's Hobbit were completely, they couldn't have been two different experiences. And I don't mean positive and negative either, you know, but Guillermo is just very, very hands-on. It got to the point where we um, we had to ask Guillermo to stop coming in so much, because like he wasn't giving us enough time to do more stuff because he loved being in the creative environment that the Weta design room provided. And at one point, I was designing the 3 trolls, Bert, William, and Tom, and I'm loving it, because I'm drawing these things, and I hadn't finished the design, and I don't know, pride of an artist or whatever. I look forward to you want to show the finished design, because someone sees something half done, it doesn't resonate or whatever. Not with Guillermo. So Guillermo, my cubicle happened to be right next to the meeting room door, and so he's walking past, and I'm trying to finish it before the meeting or something, and he walks past the door and he's like, "Are those the trolls?" I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "They're done. Those are the trolls. It's in the movie." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, those are the trolls." I'm like, "Oh, can I finish the design?" He's like, "No." I'm like, and so I'm there, like, and this is back when this kind of thing was really important to me as a young conceptual designer. I was like, my 3 favorite characters and my favorite book for my favorite directors, that just happened, right? Of course, that all got binned and shelved and lost when it started again on Peter's thing. And of course, you got to wipe the slate clean and move on. But yeah, so I ended up sculpting the maquettes for these trolls, and I guess I can talk about this because somehow they did end up in the Art of the Hobbit book. But Guillermo's trolls were gonna have, he had me design them with, he wanted them to have 3 huge backpacks that they did their looting with. And then I went down this mad design tangent that Guillermo just let me do. The whole time I was designing this, I was so excited. It's like, oh my God, because I was so obsessed with Battles for Middle Earth. It's like, Games Workshop are going to be making my trolls. And like anything I design is going to be made in plastic by Games Workshop. And like, look, I don't know if there's ever been a situation ever where someone who is as much of a fan as something as Games Workshop is as much of a fan as The Hobbit and is designing on it. You know what I mean? It's like, I was, in some ways, I was getting to design my dream Games Workshop miniature at the highest level, which is not why I was there and was not why I was getting paid. But no one else knew that. I knew that, right? So I'm there designing what is going to be the best Games Workshop miniature ever. That was now my brief, not what was going to make Guillermo feel better, not what was going to be. I mean, and then what I created, I'll never forget, like Dan Henner, who was the production designer that had to physically make what I designed. One time he saw me like, "You designed the backpacks, did you?" Great. Yep. Anyway, but so the backpacks, because like, how does a troll make a backpack? He doesn't go down to Kathmandu and get a hiking pack, right? And so I figured they'd cram them together out of their raids on settlements, right? But then I thought, I want all 3 backpacks to be completely original and never reuse the same element, but they also had to explain a character. So, and then, but by this stage, Guillermo had asked me to give art lessons to his family once a week. So I was at Guillermo's house once a week, and we would keep talking about it. And then we kind of discussed how Guillermo thought it would be hilarious if one of the trolls, I don't know if I can swear on your channel, but he just always called them the bitch. And like, so they had this cooking bitch, and like there were 2 kind of tough, you bloody, masculine, trolls, but then there was one that was like their bitch who was doing all the cooking. And so for that backpack, I crammed like a chicken coop in with a smoking rack, and and I made like a frying pan out of a bronze statue of like from a graveyard of someone holding a book, and all the cooking utensils were like farming implements, and they had a spice rack and everything. And then one who I thought would be the most militant, boisterous one, his was kind of crammed together out of more siege warfare, like a catapult and I forget now. And then one I thought was more of a hunter gatherer, so they had like a wagon full of goats and all this stuff. And there's about 100 elements in every backpack, and and I'm scraping Google images together and painting this up. And then And then all of a sudden there was this huge fluster around the workshop, and it's like Warner Brothers are coming in 3 weeks, and they want to see what's happening with Guillermo's thing, and we want to put our best foot forwards. And I was like, oh, I'll sculpt the trolls for you. And it's like, really? You can do all 3 of those? I'm like, yep. And then he went away, and Richard's like, Johnny, do you know what you've just said? I'm like, yep. And then so there was this amazing model maker called Shari who went on to be a model maker for Leica. That, you know, she's that good. And so I was art directing her to model make these so she did about, I would call it like 7 months work in 3 weeks, making these 3 backpacks, every element, all those elements. I've named 10, and there's 100 elements that made these backpacks, and she's model making and all putting together while I'm sculpting trolls in different backpack positions that will hope, and then that goes to molding and casting and painting and everything coming together. And I'm obviously one cog in this huge machine. Everyone's getting their thing ready for this big presentation. But yeah, these beautiful maquettes came together of these trolls, and you get to see a hint of them in the book. But that was probably the thing I was most proud of in the film industry, because then because I'd made a friendship with the Perry twins, I went over to England and to see a friend during the project of The Hobbit, and just to give you an idea of what it's like to work with some of these people, like at a lunch, I told Guillermo Del Toro, I was like, look, I'm going to be away for the next month going to England. And Alan Lee is sitting next to him. You know, so I'm a teenager working with Alan Lee and John Howe, and even Mike Mignola from the Hellboy comics. I had his art tattooed to my arm, and now we're in the same design meetings, you know. And I call the person in my time of life at my age, with this being in the past, probably shouldn't be getting as excited about these memories or trying to play it cool, but it was cool, man. It's so, I mean, it's a happy time of my life, you know. And anyway, so like I tell Guillermo I'm going over to England, and Alan Lee, just this god of a man, and I worshipped his work before I got there, and now we're sitting in meetings cordially talking about our art. And like I walked out of a meeting once, and John Howe said to me once, he's like, I don't want to do his voice, but you know, he said like, he wasn't on board with all of how fantastical Guillermo was going with the movie, but he said your trolls are really hit my vision of Tolkien, or something like that. And I said, oh, thanks, John. And it's like, you know, to hear that, do you know what I mean? That's like Jim Henson telling you you're a fantastic puppeteer or something. It was just, but so yeah, in this lunch, Alan Lee's like, oh, you're going to England? Would you like to borrow my house? I'm like, what? You know? And so like Alan Lee lends me his house in Chadford, Devon, which is this beautiful like little Warhammer village, right? And then while I'm there, I wandered down the road and got to have lunch with Brian and Randy Froud at their house. And so like all of my life goals are getting complete. And then I go and stay with the Perry twins, who have separate houses, but in the same kind of block. I don't know what you call them. You got key codes and gates and stuff, and
Sure.
This beautiful little block in Nottingham. You know, and each house has the big, lovely Napoleonic painting of them as generals that their friend from Games Workshop did, and just these lovely guys who barely knew me, but just like Alan Lee, like the Perry twins, like, oh, our house is your house, and then they got to take me around Games Workshop, and so I had a meeting with the top brasses of Games Workshop, all of which you've now interviewed, and like, I recognize that guy, you know, and so I'm just freaking out talking about them, like, oh, get excited, you're gonna like, and I was telling them all the stuff that's gonna be coming from Guillermo's movie into the game. Like I had no idea some of the stuff I've learned previously, and then some extra on top of that just from your interviews of how potentially, you know, the Battles for Middle Earth game had begun to not be as popular in the that, you know, I was just saying before, that gap we're all waiting for the next Hobbit movie to come out. Everyone thought it would be, you know, but they didn't know that it was going to be like Star Wars staggered between like the next trilogy, and so I was probably all of my excitement may have been falling on deaf ears of them going, we're never going to afford that. That's not happening. I'm not sure, but I just got really excited about potentially being the liaison between Weta Workshop and Games Workshop, because they were my two favorite things on planet Earth. For me, to this date, honestly, I outside of the work Ralph McQuarrie and Sid Mead did on the original Star Wars trilogy, Weta Workshop and Games Workshop, they are the two like most prolific, original, consistently brilliant facilities of inspired, imaginative, flawless conceptual design. And I don't even put myself in that camp. The couple of trolls and dwarves and flippant little things I did, my little footnote in the history of Weta, whatever. I'm talking about Jamie Biswarrick and Ben Wooten and Daniel Faulkner and Richard Taylor and the real geniuses there. Like I still look back and just I'm blown away by what I saw on a daily basis on their desks. But I'm talking their stuff, and what Games Workshop do, to the amount that they do. It's just for someone like me who's obsessed with world building and is a passionate world builder, there are no two greater places. There's companies, like Stan Winston did some amazing stuff, like a little bit on this film, a little bit on that film, some great dinosaurs here and there. But I can name so many companies that have done mind-bogglingly outstanding creative effects and designs. Really, let's just talk about designs because Games Workshop don't do effects. But just from a conceptual design point of view, there are no two other companies that could equal the body of work, and the caliber and the quality. And I don't just mean like, they got some good designers painting some good things. I'm really, really talking about the quality of the thought behind the conceptual designs itself. Something in one of your previous interviews, I can't remember who it is now because I've watched them all in succession. And the same way that I know every Tom Waits song by heart, but I probably couldn't tell you which album it's from because I'm just always listening to it. You know what I mean? But anyway, somebody mentioned, in the aftermath of killing the old world for Age of Sigmar, it did lead to the freeing and opening of conceptual designs. And I don't know if it was in my head or they may have mentioned it, but definitely I could personally take or leave Stormcast myself, but that's nobody's problem. But the I'm going to say it wrong because I always second guess myself. But is it Caradon Overlords?
I think it's Caradron.
Caradron Overlords, yeah. Right?
Yeah, I think.
I've spent thousands of dollars on them. Can't say their name. Just some of the they wouldn't really fit in the old world, but the clean slate, outside of any like "ow, my heart's broken" or politics aside from that, or like how could you make that decision and think it was good? Whatever politics you have around that, you know what I mean? It's like some of the designs around that stuff are so original. Like there's nothing like, yes, there's obviously inspirations there. Like they didn't invent steampunk, but it's not steampunk. There's an influence there. They didn't invent flying ship. They didn't even invent the way dwarves look. You know what I mean? Games Workshop certainly have helped define and flavor how dwarves look, nearly more than anyone though. But still, like just the level of design of what Games Workshop have been doing in recent years. I mean, because let's face it, for so many years, it was derivative of 70s depictions of Lord of the Rings. Like they didn't invent that look of orc, but they mastered it. And then World of Warcraft completely ripped it off. But like, I still think of it as the Games Workshop orc or whatever. But like, dwarves sort of look like dwarves and elves sort of look like elves when Games Workshop began developing them. But you see stuff in the wake of Age of Sigmar that is such surehand standard conceptual original genius. I buy heaps of it without ever playing a game, like a lot of people, but I just holding it and painting it and getting to put my flavor over it. It's such an inspiring time to be a gamer and a conceptual artist, and that's what actually pulled me into the world of gaming. Really, it just felt like there's another story. I feel like I'm still not answering even what your last questions are.
You absolutely are. No, but I think that is an interesting sort of transition though that you've made. So you talked about how Weta, whilst you were there, you were increasingly spending that extra time on the gloaming and doing your own world building and getting more into that and that sort of passion. So how did that transition actually take effect? How did you move from working in the film industry to working in a sort of gaming and a modeling space?
Well, so after 2 years of being in miniatures, when I got doing the 2 years I spent in miniatures, I spent all my spare time trying to become a better concept artist. And then after 2 years, I got the role in the concept design department. And so I figured, well, I'm now getting paid 50 hours a week to become the better conceptual designer. So I'm going to spend all of that time I was trying to be a better conceptual designer to be a better sculptor, because I was spending all of my lunch breaks in the sculpting room anyway. I'm not articulate enough to put into words what the Labyrinth and Jabba's Palace did for me. What Phil Tippett produced for Jabba's Palace and what the team of people produced for Labyrinth, like that physical, like even today with today's special effects, CG does nothing for me. You know what I mean? Even the best CG, I just don't care. Give me a rubber costume dimly lit behind Jabba, and like I'm still pausing it to see, like that. The internet's almost kind of, and action figures have kind of spoiled the magic of some of those dimly lit figures in a way, but the majesty of creature effects and stuff like that. So getting to sculpt my own after growing up holding them my whole life, with, like I said, with He-Man and Thundercats and all that stuff, I just wanted to sculpt. And there was this period of time, I think it was actually between King Kong and Tintin, where there was 4 or 5 months where there wasn't any work for me, and that happens a lot in the film industry, And I go, that's fine, Richard. Would you mind if I just used that spare desk in the sculpting room and taught myself to sculpt? It's like, oh, that's a great idea. And so I started kind of sculpting a goblin, right? Well, actually, I started sculpting John Hurt as the storyteller, but I wasn't a good enough sculptor. It didn't look like John Hurt. There were all these great forms there, and it wasn't a bad sculpt, but it was a bad sculpt if you looked at it as John Hurt, as the storyteller. And so I started turning into a goblin. So I started making a pretty good goblin. And then I showed Richard, and we're in the kitchen, and he just took out a teaspoon and starts carving into it. And in this terrifying kind of 3 minutes of sculpting with Richard, I learned more than I had in 3 years anywhere else. Do you know what I mean? But it kind of occurred to me that it's like, I could, like, Johnny sculpts a goblin, and like, yep, okay, that's Johnny's goblin. Like, what have I learned from that? Because you can't say that's not Johnny's goblin. There's nothing to reference it to. And so I thought my favorite creature feature in the history of film is Hoggle. So I just decided I'm going to sculpt Hoggle until I get him right. And I spent months and thousands of dollars creating a life-size Hoggle. And then I also did Alf and Ralph, who are the two Riddle shield guys, based on the naive thought. It's like, oh, they've got 4 heads, but it's the same sculpt. So I'd only need to do one sculpt on one hand, and I'd be able to make them, not thinking about the months it took to make the rest of their body and the costume and the eyebrows. Anyway, so I had 3 life-size, after about 6 months and as many grand, I ended up with 3 life-size replicas from the Labyrinth, which were pretty bloody good for someone teaching himself how to sculpt. And so I had achieved my mandate in how I learned to sculpt. But then I looked at them and I thought, man, if I'd been making my own thing, I'd be halfway towards quite an exciting IP. And that happened around the same time as I picked up Tony DeSoliti's Spiderwick Field Guide with all these watercolor, beautiful pictures in it. And absolutely, I'm probably saying his name wrong too, and Alessio Cavatore's name. I second guess every word that comes out of my mouth because I always get people's names wrong. Anyway, but I'm looking at the Spiderwick and I'm thinking, I'm 20 years old. My mind is just warping at how awesome it is. And I thought, I don't want to just sculpt a goblin and go, there's a goblin again, right? I wanted to give myself a project that anything I sculpted went into that project. So the project grew stronger as I grew stronger as an artist. All of my friends had like 30, 40, $60,000 loans from university to get the job they wanted. And I already had the job I wanted without having to go to university. I went straight from high school to my dream job. And so I thought, I'm just going to give myself one of those like 60 grand loans everybody has, but I'm going to put it towards my own thesis, right? And instead of ending up 60 grand in debt with a certificate that says I can't be employed somewhere because I didn't think this through, I would have spent that 60 grand on my thesis, which will be all of the basically Jabba's palace, but for the fairy world. Like, like, can you imagine just walking around Jabba's palace and being in the presence of those aliens? I wanted to do that, but for medieval folklore, right? And so I thought that, like, I'm not an amazing watercolor painter like Tony from Spiderwork, but I'm really passionate about sculpting. I can't stop myself. I may as well turn it into a project so something might come out of it. But the project defined what I sculpted, and it fed into itself in a beautiful structured way for someone as me that, I can't even complete a sentence. How am I going to complete a project? And the more I sculpted, the more I needed to sculpt, and the more I needed to, it was the snake eating its own tail. And I just kept building and building this world. And anytime there was work at Weta, I'd take it. But between the projects and then at lunchtimes, after work, and every single weekend, I had this, Richard let me have this multi-million-dollar facility. And the thing is, the better Weta did, the more Oscars they got, the more Lord of the Rings and Avatars and what's that one, the District 9s, the more accolades they got, the bigger the company grew, as it should. And the bigger the company grew, the more people it had to hire to run the company facility, because they're dealing with millions and millions and millions of dollars from Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema, whoever. And obviously, like it's been interesting hearing how much Games Workshop have talked about you've got people in creative roles for years. It's actually not in the company or that person's interest to bump them up to a managerial role. That's not a gift. It's actually a punishment. Weta is like that. Huge projects need managers. And so you've got to kind of bring people in that may have worked for Pepsi or not very few jobs are goblin and troll related, but these jobs, they need managing anyway, right? So, the bigger Weta grew, the more management teams are managing these creatives who feel that they know better. In some cases, we probably do, but in a lot of cases, we absolutely need management. Someone like me who can't deal with authority and gets kicked out of high school because of that kind of thing, like it, it's not like I'm not a team player. I don't know what I am or was anyway, but it is what it is. But there were people whose job it was to make the company run efficiently, right? And so, what do you do with a Johnny Fraser-Allen? And from what Richard tells me, there were people who would be like, "Why is Johnny still here doing his own goblins? Like, that's a desk we could be using for sculpting." I'm on those people's side. Like, I don't feel victimized or disliked in that situation. Their job is to cut the fat off the bacon, and I'm the streakiest part, And but Richard, and again, this is like I'm just being self-aware of that situation I'm in, and I'm not like, again, I don't have negative feelings towards it. Like, those people were doing their job. They should, But it's just amazing that in all those situations, Richard would be like, "No, leave Johnny. He's doing his thing." And now the Gloaming is a huge exhibition that he's taken around the world and has permanently displayed in his permanent exhibition in Auckland. But also, what I learned from the Gloaming, I built up skills on the Gloaming that I didn't get a chance to do on some of the paid jobs. And I got to develop my world building to a point that, I mean, Adam Savage on Tested has done a feature on it, but Richard had me art direct the entire fantasy section of this huge multi-million-dollar exhibition that they've created in Auckland, which I did this kind of like fantasy I put Dungeons and Dragons together with my fascination of dinosaurs and kind of created a D&D dinosaur world. But anyway, I was only in a position where Richard could go, Johnny can art direct this project, not because of having worked on the BFG or the Hobbit or anything like that, but because of what I'd created in the Gloaming. So Richard's investment of saying Johnny's doing his thing, paid, like, all he needed to really do is the company lost some overheads on me using the coffee machine and some electricity on Saturdays when I was sneaking in to work at my desk, sort of thing. And Richard in his head accepted that as being able to write that off. And for me, it meant the world. But because of that, I developed a system. Well, I don't know system, but I would and could never say no to Richard, because I owed him so much, and it would get me in these situations. Like 2 years in a row, he had me host this charity event, which was just kind of body painted models and lingerie models, and I had to come out and host it, which I know seems like, oh, tough gig, but it really was, because like Richard, who I'd known for years, he saw me as like a little animatic gobshite that could just blah blah blah, and I'm like, that'd be great, put that on stage. And I'm like, no, there's having a laugh with you, and then there's having a laugh with like 300 paying high society charity people that are getting drunk watching lingerie models, and but I said yes to it, and I did it for 2 years in a row. We raised heaps of money for the neonatal ward at the hospital, and it was worth doing. But I just mean, like, I'd find myself in all these situations that I wouldn't have volunteered for, and because Richard knew I'd say yes to them. One of them was he had me set the entire Gloaming up to show Prince Charles, and we had to get the people came in, and they're like, you can't touch him, you can't shake his hand, you can only call him your majesty, and fair enough, that's the way the gig is, and then so he shows up, and he's surrounded by men in black sunglass people, and I've never been a particularly fast learner, and I said, oh, g'day mate, and I called him mate instead of your majesty. I went to shake his hand, and the men in black guys kind of step forwards like that. But then Prince Charles just goes, hello, shakes my hand, and then I spend 30 minutes walking him around all these little monsters that I've made, right? And he's all engaged and he's fascinated. Like I'm not that fussed about the royal family, but my dad's British, and I knew he'd get a kick out of knowing his son. So and and this really nice guy is. Once I started explaining that the Gloaming is primarily based on Eurocentric medieval folklore, and I'm only telling the story because this is out of all the weird and wonderful things that happened to me in the film industry, I think the weirdest one is the now King of England, right? Which again doesn't mean a lot to me outside of the fact that, like, I'm a medieval fantasy nut, so like, this is like, for me, it's like, it's my world equivalent of Theoden or Denethor, So the future King of England, this is a fact, in my lifetime, has turned around to me, looked me in the eye, and said, tell me, Johnny, does the Gloaming have a burgle-noz? And I'm like, you have to know your deep-seated countryside medieval folklore to know what a burgle-noz is? I'm like, oh, yeah, Charles, it's the one riding the hedgehog. He's like, wonderful. And then the funniest thing he says, and again, I'm saying the story lovingly. He was so kind and so engaging and genuinely interested in these goblins and trolls. And then he says, well, I just found it so funny. He goes, no, you must tell me when the Gloaming comes out. I'm like, and I'll give you a text. What am I supposed to tell? And it's gonna be coming out next year finally, but I'm not sure how I'm gonna let the King of England know that. But it was a really pleasant experience with a really pleasant man for what it was worth. But I just thought it was such a bizarre situation I'd never be in outside of But again, like, so that stuff happened all the time, and it
Yeah.
was like that was a day work. But then when the Perry twins come around, because I'm such a, you know, collecting White Dwarf and so obsessed, and um, anyway, so I had this huge body of work that became the Gloaming, which became an exhibition, and it was, you know, I was figuring out, I really wanted to tell a story with it, right? And it's become an amazing game thing that I'm developing. That I'll talk about in a minute for a reason. But um, ultimately, what I want to do is be a world builder. And I realized, though, I was never going to be a Peter Jackson. The not because I'm lazy or don't have the passion for that, but like the world of Hollywood that you've got to fight through, like you've got to be absolutely superhuman, you know. And I'm driven and creative and excited and stuff, but it's a different caliber of man to do that level of creativity, but also go out and do the junkets and work with the actors and have all those disappointments and fund it. And like I just had to be realistic about, like, I'm not a Peter Jackson superhuman, and as much as I'd like to direct my vision onto the cinema, that, you know, like, that is just too pie in the sky for me. But also, like, I'd come to realize through because I thought I wanted to be a director. Up until about 25, I was still spending a lot of my money I earned at Weta making like little fantasy short films with like my friends, and you know, putting a lot of time and money into all the building the world. When I got time to shooting it, I tried to kind of rush through it or get other people to do this and that, and I kind of realized it's like, oh, I'm really just interested in the world building part. I don't, I'm not actually a great director of actors, or like, I can't just assume that I'm going to edit a good movie, because editing is a complete art. You know what I mean? And so that's why there is an editor and a sound editor and a casting director, all that kind of stuff. It's like films take that much because it takes that many experts in this many fields. It's like, what? I just thought I could do all of that. And of course I did, because I was a naive idiot, and naivety is my power. But anyway, so, but it was a really great learning experience to realize that, no, I am in the right place. I really just want to be a world builder, but I still want to do it. It's amazing world building for Guillermo or Peter Jackson or Steven Spielberg. Like, it's nothing to turn your nose up at, but I still found myself wanting more, which is what the Gloaming became. I still wanted to kind of be the head architect of a vision, because it's just, that's what I enjoy the most, you know, and that's what I just found myself leaning towards. And 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 so I go, well, how do I get this vision out there if it's not going to be a film? And so I started thinking it's going to be illustrating. And so I start making this, and because I don't do, like, I decided to illustrate a book by photographing life-size sculptures before I even knew how to sculpt. I mean, that's how my brain works, right? And so that same brain that's from the same guy that's like, I'm going to make this book that's going to be like Alan Lee's illustrated Lord of the Rings. You know, like, it's this big, it's massive. Every kind of 50 pages or whatever is going to be my insert of the photograph I've made, and I've made like 50 these photograph creatures, and so the book's going to be this big. And so at the time, I was still with a high school sweetheart who, you know, we're broken up now, but at the time she went on to win the Man Booker Prize for her book, the Luminaries. You know, like, she's this one wonderful, amazing author. And so around the time we were kind of splitting up, she still wanted, she graciously tried to help me get in touch with these publishers. So I had these meetings with like 3 or 4 very big publishers that met me because she made the meeting. They had no idea and cared not to know who I am. And again, I'm on the side, right? But, you know, they've got this like money making asset girl saying, can you, you know, my friend's got this book property. And in all of the meetings, none of them would even make eye contact with me. And none of them wanted me to illustrate the book, because this was still at a time when there was this very small time in the Gloaming's lifespan where she was going to help write it, which didn't work out, and that's completely awesome and fine. But they would just keep talking to her, saying, "You can write it, but we don't want Johnny to illustrate it. And I'm kind of like in the room. And then one meeting, the guy was like, oh, you can illustrate it, but you only if you just do little black and white headings at the start of each chapter. And I was like, it's an illustrated book. But what they said to me, the thing that really stuck out, and I totally agree with them. Again, I'm talking about this past Johnny as a naive idiot, right? Like bless his little heart. But sitting there that I could just assume I'd do these things, and rather than think ahead, I just went and did them. But what someone said to me is like, yeah, but you're trying to make Alan Lee's like Lord of the Rings book, right? But you don't have Lord of the Rings, and you're not Alan Lee. And also, we could sell 50,000 copies of her novel, or we could sell a few thousand copies of your illustrated book. And everything they were saying was completely right. And their complete disdain for me was totally founded, right? But I'm sitting there, and I went away from those meetings, and me and my girlfriend at the time, we parted our ways in life and stuff. But I'd worked on the Gloaming for so many years by that stage anyway, and I realized it's like, well, I felt I'm not often pleased or impressed with myself, but I did feel like, I was happy that I didn't feel particularly destroyed by that. And all I did after that was feel like I'd kind of dodged a bullet, because even if it only ever sat on my own shelf, I decided I still want to make that Gloaming book. I still want to make my dream book, because it was always about making my dream book and not other people's opinions. And that's because I spent 50 hours a week working on other people's creative projects, like designing Spielberg's BFG, designing Peter Jackson's dwarves, on Guillermo's Hobbit at least. I got to design whatever the hell I thought would look cool, and Guillermo would be like, "Hey man, it's in the movie, that's great," and so I never felt like, even though I was working on Guillermo's Hobbit, and I think I speak for a lot of the people in it, it was kind of like we weren't working on Guillermo's Hobbit, we were all working on our Hobbit. You know what I mean? Because it's like he wasn't gatekeeping anything or shutting down any ideas. Anyway, and so I think once that ended, there was this massive, I'd got a taste for it, and there's this massive cavity in my life where I still wanted to have that passion for creativity. And that's when Guillermo left the Hobbit. I'd been working a couple years on the Gloaming, but after what I learned from him and some of the conversations we had about how you design fantasy, it just changed a lot of me as a designer. And so when he left, I decided to completely devote myself a lot more to the Gloaming. We had to dive in headfirst to redesigning Peter's version of The Hobbit, which occupied a lot of my time. But once that started winding down, I definitely started becoming more of a Gloaming designer than a film designer. But I took the jobs where I could, but that was only really to pay for the Gloaming, and also to be able to have a foot remaining in Weta, because I loved being there and I loved the people and I loved Richard. But I also couldn't, I was halfway through this vision that I couldn't complete if I wasn't able to use Weta anymore. And so that was always quite a pressure for me, and always kept me going back and designing on films when I got an opportunity to say, oh yeah, I still work here. My fob still works. I'm still, but yeah, I was spinning a lot of plates. But and anyway, but then again, I've got so many disparate little stories, but I ended up illustrating a book for Evangeline Lilly. She plays Philippa Boyne's Avatar in the Hobbit movies, and she's in Lost and stuff like that. And she had a kid's book, and she was looking for an illustrator. And I thought, well, a job's a job, and I haven't illustrated a book that's on a shelf yet. This could be a good start, and learn the ropes. And I did do the first book, which ended up, she wanted 17, and I didn't have 16 more in me, and so kind of got out of that situation. But it I kind of felt after that, it's like, I'm not, but between that situation and the meeting, the London publishers situation, it's like, I'm not, I don't know if the Gloaming, how I see it, is publishable.
Hmm.
And I don't really have a lot of interest in reshaping the Gloaming to be something publishable, because it's always been a world building vision, you know. And let's face it, the Dark Crystal is the highest creative expression of world building that's ever been, cohesively achieved and put out into the world.
Hmm.
There is no other better example, and done in a time when no one else had done anything like it. I mean, there's not a human in that movie. For every reason why that movie is the greatest creative feat of human imagination is also all of the same reasons why it bombed at the box office and no one was ready for it. You know what I mean? But for me, like that movie is a work of genius, and I wasn't trying to replicate or emulate the Dark Crystal, but that was the impossible benchmark I'd set for myself. I at nowhere at any time I was like, I want to be a renowned New York Times bestseller or something like that. I just wanted to be I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be the best at anything. And I certainly don't consider myself the best at anything, but I just wanted to be, I just wanted to reach my personal peak as a world builder.
Yeah.
And so at one point I thought I was going to be a filmmaker. Then I thought, I'll get my vision through illustrating. But then for a long time I sat in this limbo of like, I've done so much with the Gloaming. Yeah, it's a traveling exhibition. I mean, when Stephen Fry saw the Gloaming, not only did he offer to narrate it, but he paid for his own studio recording costs in London to do it. And I think that's more of a reflection on what a wonderful man Stephen Fry is than how wonderful the Gloaming is, to be fair. But I mean, like, it was reaching people. I had created this fantastic body of work that I was proud of.
Hmm.
And part of me was like, I guess it's just it opened doors for me to work for the Jim Henson company. It opened doors for me to art direct a team of the people that I grew up idolizing at Weta on a fantastical project. It made me a better artist. So I felt like it had not been a waste of time or money. And in some ways, there was 4 or 5 years where I felt like the Gloaming has been the Gloaming and did what it did. And then the quantum shift in me happened, which was, it turns out being like a lead conceptual designer on Hollywood blockbusters, the dream I envisaged for myself at 5 years old, wasn't the top of the pyramid of conceptual world building. It took 17 years of going home every night and making gaming terrain for my Games Workshop games, and then getting into Dungeons and Dragons and elaborate Hero Quest and Mordheim self-made expansions, and then it took all of those years to realize it's like, oh man, like I'm a gamer. I have so much more fun building worlds for my tabletop than I do for movies. And I'm not saying I didn't have fun. I loved every minute. Well, like any job, there were some really hard times, but that's on the human condition, not on Weta Workshop. Weta Workshop is a fantastic, wonderful place to work with wonderful people. You're going to have hard times. You're going to butt heads with some people. I think there must have been 3,000 people come through that place in the 17 years I was there. I didn't get on with 3 of them. Like that's an amazing statistic for any company. You know what I mean? But anyway, but I just realized, man, I'm having so much fun being my own Spielberg, being my own Del Toro, setting my own briefs and living up to those expectations. And then that's when this opportunity happened where it just, again, the little Bowie angel, he hadn't passed on by then, but like the Bowie kind of barometer, the Bowieometer that was guiding me through my whole life. I remember just driving home from work one day. I just got into Hero Quest again. I was playing it heaps and heaps, and I was thinking, you know what? Do you know what would make the single greatest board gaming experience of all time? It's the Labyrinth. It is a board game. A character gets a party of 4 and it's basically Hero Quest. You've got the Hoggle's the dwarf, Ludo is the barbarian, right? Sarah's the elf, and then Sir Didymus is kind of like a wizard. I mean, some of those roles might function differently, but like it is here, and then they keep opening doors. They don't know what's on the other side of them. They go through this like masonry maze, and they fight minions getting up to the big boss. It's kind of Hero Quest the movie, you know, and it's like they would make the single greatest board game. It would be even better than Hero Quest because you can completely flip dungeon tiles and end up in different parts of the board. You've got a 13 round ticking clock, and I started almost panicking. Almost had to pull the car over because I thought, why has no one made the Labyrinth board game? I get home and I Google Labyrinth board game, and it just so happened to be in the same week that there was this article. It's like Riverhorse get the rights to do Labyrinth board game. I'm like, who the hell are Riverhorse? And I Google Riverhorse. I'm like, Alessio Cavatore. So sorry, my two favorite games were Mordheim and Battles for Middle Earth, right? And I'd read his battle reports. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I knew the people in White Dwarf magazine in the same way that I can name the members of Led Zeppelin. You know what I mean? Like it's the same situation for me. You know, same in the same way that I can like name the Muppet performers and who does Piggy and who does Gonzo, whatever. You know, that's the level of fame they occupied for me. And because I knew the Perry twins, I emailed them. I was like, "Can I? Sorry if this is a bit cheeky, but can I please have Alessio's email?" And like, yeah, okay, well, no harm in that. I wasn't a nutcase off the streets; they knew me. And then I emailed Alessio my folio, and told him what Labyrinth meant to me. And you know, New Zealanders are absolutely programmed to not talk themselves up. We feel quite ill about it. But if I just write what I've done on paper at Weta, it looks quite good. So I just did that. I worked on this movie, blah, 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 and I just said, hi, you know, I'm Johnny Fraser-Allen, big fan of yours. I'm the new designer for your Labyrinth game. It's going to be nice working for you. So, and Alessio got back to me and it was very exciting. We had, you know, some wonderful calls, and then we went on to the game. I worked on the game, and then and yeah, and that was so the game didn't turn out to be what I had in my head because Alessio, we're about to have our first daughter, you know, and as Alessio had a 5-year-old daughter, and what I can't wait for 5 years from now to watch Labyrinth with my daughter. It's 80% of the reason I'm having a kid, you know what I mean? And so like Alessio's having this great experience with Labyrinth with his daughter, and he wanted, and you know, his probably two loves in his life are Labyrinth and his kid, right? And so he wanted to double whammy that experience and create a Labyrinth board game that dads can play with their kids. And he completely nailed that brief. He made, you know, an accessible family board game. But and that gave me the opportunity to sculpt these Labyrinth characters and illustrate for it. But because it's like the Gloaming was the biggest project. If you'd ever told me how much it was going to take and cost me to sculpt like Hoggle and Alphenralph, I wouldn't have started. I don't ever regret having started it. If you'd ever told me how much work was going to go into the Gloaming and how much money and sacrifice and probably relationships, right? I never would have started it. I'm so happy I started it. You know what I mean? And so the same thing was like I'd imagined this Labyrinth game. And so still to this day, for the last 5 years, I've been making a Warhammer scale Jim Henson's Labyrinth that I can design a 13-hour game around to play.
Right.
Anyways, and so I'm sculpting the miniatures of Labyrinth as 3-ups because that's the only way I knew how to do it, because I don't digital model, because I respect digital modeling, and I now art direct digital modelers for my business. But I don't get joy out of doing it personally. But it's an absolutely amazing tool, and we're doing wonderful things with it. But I mean, if I'm going to be spending 10 hours a day at work, I got to really love it, and I just love pushing the clay and stuff like that. And digital model, like the Labyrinth models I art directed Mikey Gilbert to create for, say, the Labyrinth pinball machine I've just art directed for the Jim Henson company and Barrels of Fun Pinball. They're actually better sculpts of the Wise Man and Ludo and the Doors than I hand sculpted personally,
Right.
because of what you can do digitally. But I mean, again, my 3-ups miniaturized into miniatures that I'm really proud of. But it really just woke me up to, like, all of those years I was spent making gaming terrain for myself. I never once crossed my mind that there was a career in it, even though it was my absolute passion and it was kind of like my mistress, you know. And then by chance I fall into gaming because I had to be the one to do the Labyrinth board game. They're probably better people for the job, but you know, screw them. I had to do it. I don't want them to do it. You know? And then so now I'm working in games, and you know, it was a learning experience for me. You know, I'd never, what had actually happened. Oh God, Alessio's probably going to watch this because he'll watch your channel because it's a great channel that relates to his interest. But I, you know, I said I've got to do the models for it, and he's like, "Great, I've got this Weta sculptor doing the models for it." And then I sculpted Hoggle this big as a proof of concept, and the Hoggle came out great. And I did it in like 2.5 days, and and I showed him. He's like, "That's a great Hoggle." And I'm like, "Yeah, man, it took me 2.5 days." And he's like, "Yeah, let's do the rest." And all of the rest, I could sculpt Hoggle in my sleep. I've been drawing him since I was 5. I've already sculpted him like 4 times. I knocked Hoggle out, you know. And then the rest, it's like, what am I doing? You know, and I had to deliver these miniatures that were far beyond my means, and I did. I mean, Didymus is great, Ludo came out great, but I had to kind of out of my paycheck pay Jane Wenley and Jamie Biswarwick to help me get the likenesses of Sarah and Jareth, because I'd never sculpted a human before because they're so boring. I see them every day. You know, why do I like? And not only had I not sculpted people before, but literally the 2 most attractive people that had ever been born on planet Earth. I've got to sculpt that perfection this big, and it's like, okay, so like, why does my Sarah look like Rowan Atkinson? You know, it's like, look, why does my David Bowie look like Pete Postlethwaite? This is a nightmare, you know. And so I brought some people in to help me with that, and so I didn't really make any money on some of those sculpts, but that was irrelevant. I you know, jokes on Alessio, he didn't need to pay me at all. I would have done it for free. But I, you know, and it was great, you know, sharing ideas with him, and he was very free to just let me do the thing, and but you know, again, I just, there's an alternate, you know, Rick and Morty timeline universe out there, where like Alessio made like the Mordheim meets Battles for Middle Earth version of Labyrinth, the tabletop game, you know. But again, like how naive of me was it to expect like a Warhammer Cursed City box for an 80s nostalgia movie that has a limited cult following? Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Would have bankrupted Riverhorse, and he knew exactly what he was doing, and he's made you know, a well-selling, accessible game for Labyrinth fans, which is exactly what he meant to do, and exactly what he did.
Yeah.
And one day, I mean, I'm just ticking away at making this Labyrinth in my studio, but and then obviously that followed on to doing the Dark Crystal game for them as well, and so by that stage, this is how I got into tabletop gaming, right? I don't know if, how long has this even gone for so far? I'm so embarrassed with it.
Well, I mean, we've been talking for a while. I was curious just about if you can sort of encapsulate the Gloaming as a setting. Like you mentioned that it's inspired by European folklore, but what's the pitch, I guess, for the Gloaming as a place to play games?
So okay, yeah, totally. So after the journey through tabletop gaming, which I'll get back to in a sec, but it came full circle into realizing that the gloaming was this asset I had. The things I loved most about tabletop gaming, Hero Quest, Dungeons and Dragons, kit bashing Warhammer to tell my own stories. I love the narrative you can put into your own games of Warhammer, and how they started expressing it through like narrative play situations and amendments and manuals and all that stuff. And I just started getting excited over like I've created the gloaming is like you could almost consider it like one of the realms in Warhammer, in the sense that like for me personally, it's a place that I want to visit and explore. So the gloaming is like the fairy world, but I hate using the word fairy, because it's not cute ballerinas with butterfly wings, but I just more like the Fey world. Do you know what I mean? But from medieval folklore, basically the same one that Rip Van Winkle steps into, spends an hour there, comes out, he's 60 years old, and everyone's grown up. The dangerous fairy world, the riddle telling, baby stealing, changeling world, right? And originally, what the gloaming started off for me, it was a conceptual design brief to make me excited and grow as an artist. And I wanted, in the same way that the folklore, how it was depicted in Jim Henson's Storyteller, wasn't cutesy poo fairy stuff. Like the Grufflehog is terrifying. I wanted this dark, creepy, like kind of. I always wanted to believe that the fairy world was real. I never have, but like the believing in it is a huge, just the fun of it. And what if it did exist? What if David Attenborough, instead of going to Africa, went to the fairy world? The fairy world for me is called the gloaming because it just became my favorite word. The gloaming as a word means that like that little period of kind of golden light you get between evening and dusk, right? But in medieval folklore, that is the time when the veil between worlds is the thinnest, and you're most likely to see a gnome or a puka or whatever, a clurican across the field. Well, that would be the time when you check in on your baby and it's not getting swapped by a changeling or something like that. And so it's like, wow, my favorite word also means my favorite thing. The chance when the goblins might come and take me away. And so I just decided I needed a Middle Earth or a Narnia or a Westeros, and so I just used the gloaming. I think even it may have just started as a placeholder, but I used it for too long, and it's definitely the gloaming now. um, and so it's the Fey realm, but I took it as seriously as humanly possible. An example of this is I did doing all these creatures, but I decided to do some gnomes, and so I did what would a gnome look like to Scottish folklore? What would a gnome look like to British folklore? What would a gnome look like to the Irish folklore? And then because all folklore kind of, just because of the way land masses work, who occupied them, and which cultures were actually documenting stories in written form, most of folklore comes from the Eurocentric part of the globe. Obviously, that's not to say that obviously African and Chinese and Japanese and all sorts of other places have wonderful mythologies. But I wanted, as a New Zealander, our country is so young, but our native inhabitants are the Maori, who have just the most outstanding folk, as interesting as any Eurocentric folklore, right? But I was so serious about the gloaming being in this kind of one Eurocentric place to make it more realistic. I stepped past that seriousness for one part, because I just really felt compelled to design something from Maori folklore, and because they have this legend of the Patu Pararehe, who is a gnome who taught them how to weave flax. And I'm like, oh, man, I want to design that. One of the gnomes is just going to be the New Zealand gnome, because I've done Scottish, Irish, English, and I have some kind of descendancy connection to that, But and I'm not Maori myself, but I've grown up, surrounded in the culture and getting taught the language, and New Zealand I don't know if it could do better, but it certainly does a lot of kind of keeping the culture alive and at least taught to school kids, you know. So it was, you know, and it's an amazing culture, and so I wanted to express that. And we have something here that's called like tapu, like because basically, like any colonized land, you know, the country got kind of stolen and reshaped around these people, and so they're very protective of their myths and mythology, and like, you know, it is frowned upon for just, you know, some white person to come and reappropriate it or misappropriate it, you know. So I was aware that I was doing it out of a place of pure passion and interest and conceptual design fervor, and so I started studying everything I could learn about the Patu Parehi so I could make the most perfect Patu Parehi. But to the Māori, their idea of something really strange and foreign and creepy in the woods turned out to be a blue-eyed, pale-skinned, blonde-haired little creature, right? And I felt, which I think is fantastic, but I felt really awkward being some white dude making this Aryan little gnome and saying that's the Māori gnome, you know, and it didn't work for me at all. So I threw out all of for every other gnome, I'm taking in as much as I can learn. But for this one, I designed like his wrinkles became the muku, which is their facial carvings, and also I wanted him to predate European colonization. There were no mammals on New Zealand, you know, so there'd be no wool from the introduction of sheep and no fur from the introduction of rabbits and stoats and everything. So I made all of his costume out of like weaving natural forest fibers and flaxes together, and everything on his person, like jadestone, everything was natural and indigenous to native New Zealand prior to the British conquest, you know. And then I displayed that sculpture in Gisborne, where his myth originated, and some of the Māori elders came and saw it. And then I became the first and only non-Māori person to be invited to exhibit in the New Zealand Māori Art Expo because of it. And I just found that interesting because it came from a place of completely going against what the actual myth was to more from my heart show what I would and as a what I wanted to see basically as a conceptual designer. If I went to the movie of like the Māori mythology, I would have been disappointed to have seen a blonde-haired, white-skinned, blue-eyed gnome.
Sure.
I want to see this dark, crystally, muku flax sort of creature. So that's what I made, and with jade-stone eyes, and that's what they responded to. But that same conceptual design aesthetic I've put into, and seriousness, I've put into every creature in the gloaming, because what's so exciting about how for some time now and for some time to come I'm developing this into a fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons explore. First, right now we're working on the monster manual that takes every sculpt I've done and makes it a playable monster. Matt Roush is doing the most amazing job. We've got a whole team of people making this book. But like for me, like even the most highest produced monster manuals, you know, like only every third or fourth character has an illustration, and there's many different artists providing that illustration. Sometimes they're amazing, sometimes they're only quite good, sometimes they're just black and white sketches, you know what I mean? But I wanted to produce this monster manual that like feels like you're stepping into the world of the gloaming as much as it feels like you're stepping into the world of Thra when you watch Labyrinth, or you've been abducted by the Goblin King when you Dark Crystal, or you've been abducted by Goblin King when you watch Labyrinth. You know, I want to create a monster manual that has the same quality of design and world building that me and my fellow designers at Weta Workshop put into Middle Earth or Narnia or the Spielberg's BFG. Everything I learned in almost 2 decades of film, I want to give that into a monster manual, because D&D is as rich and exciting and as important to me as every bit as important as when I was designing a troll for Del Toro, a dwarf for Peter Jackson, or a giant for Spielberg. But I think even more so in the Gloaming, because I'm not working to anyone's brief but mine. There's no script and there's no director and there's no design room manager. It's just me completing the purest sense of my vision of everything I've learned and absorbed and adapted and been inspired by in my time as a passionate film watcher and a passionate film designer, and also as a gamer. Um, like I'm so visually orientated that it's I often find it quite disappointing the lack of visual illustration given to some Dungeons and Dragons books and content. Like as someone who now has the companies and sees the statements and the bills and knows what it means to pay an artist what they're worth to create the art, I utterly understand it and I don't devalue it, and I don't think harshly about the decisions behind not being able to illustrate every single character. But I'm because the Gloaming Monster Manual project is paying the right people to help put together the book, and I'm completely working on sweat equity and using a resource that's almost been 20 years in the making. Like I'm only able to create my dream monster manual and my dream campaign to follow it up with to the Spielbergian level that I unfairly have inside my head that I demand of my gaming media, because I've given 20 years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars probably by now from the various sources that have fueled the Gloaming. That's how much I've been able to and again, because 17 years of the work on the Gloaming Monster Manual, in the same way that these book publishers were like, your book's too full on to sell as a book. Like, I wasn't thinking about making a book. Like if I started today making a monster manual, I think of Games Workshop with all their money and time and resources and the world's greatest artists, I think if they today sat down and said, let's make this monster manual, no one in that board meeting would agree to it because I've sculpted every character, some cases life size. I mean, the dragons of a 15-foot sculpture. I photographed them in real backgrounds. It's taken 2 decades of my life to produce this monster manual before I even knew it was going to be this monster manual, but it's shaping up to be the dream gaming asset that I've always wanted. And it felt like every twist and turn and disappointment and exceptional, exciting achievement and everything, every step of my creative life, from watching The Labyrinth when I was 5 to working on blockbuster movies to working on the Labyrinth board game, every step has taken me towards making like this perfect, like it was always meant to be a Dungeons and Dragons resource of monumental proportions. I just didn't know it until the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And that's really and that's so exciting for me because I had so much to tell in this. I've written it as 3 novels. Those 3 novels may never be seen, but the fact that I spent those years writing those 3 novels, I have been to the Gloaming. I know this world back to front. So when I'm working with Matt Rauscher and he asks a question, the answer is like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this, or maybe I don't know what works best. It's like, oh, this happens, and because, like, for example, like if you were to role play in Middle Earth, like you could role play in Middle Earth so much better than if I said, right, you're on planet Bronx and the Fleftatoids are coming at you with spatula cods. You're like, okay, great, I guess, But in Middle Earth, you could walk me around that map. I know you, Jordan Sorcery, could take me. Like if I was in Bree and I said, I want to get my party to Rohan, you would know how many days in which it's going to take the questing party to get there, and you'd know what kind of characters I'd probably meet along the way and which lanes to avoid, because like the rest of us, know Middle Earth so conceptually well. And for me, I wanted to create, like, And like for one person like me, some high school dropout to go, like here's the bar I'll set for myself. I want to make like a Tolkien level universe to the visual level of the Dark Crystal. Um, like it's so utterly ridiculous. And so, like I said, like with the naivety thing, and by the way, I'm not saying it's reached those ridiculous, but shoot for the moon and hit the stars or whatever. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not saying, I'm not comparing myself in any way, but I'm just saying those are the really unrealistic um goals I set for myself, and it's taken 17 years to get to a point where my body of work and my vision has reached the uncontrollable, stupid, naive kid in the head.
You see, but
And I can say, sorry,
you say that these are unrealistic. You say that this is, a naivety. But before they were Spielberg and Tolkien, they were just kids and men who wanted to tell stories and create worlds, which is exactly what you're wanting to do, right? And what I've seen
and
of the
they were
Gloaming
all
is
inspired by thinking.
incredible. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, well, yeah, it's just it's the place I want to visit. I mean, in some ways, I've always seen it like, there's the Dark Crystal, then there was the Labyrinth, and then Jim Henson passed on. And I always feel like it's like there's this thing we didn't get, and so that was the unrealistic precedent I set for myself. I kind of wanted it just for me, like because I was never going to work on a Jim Henson movie, so I just made myself one to work on. Um, no, which is it seems so ridiculous now that I've been doing it for 17 years and I look back on what I've done. It's like it's I never would have. I'm so glad I never knew how ridiculous it was, or that I was a much more ridiculous person at 20 when I started. But yeah. But that's what I mean about how exciting tabletop gaming for me was an absolute revelation in the sense like when I so how I fell into it as well. I mean, like I was working on Labyrinth and Dark Crystal because I had to, but then after that, Weta started this board game division, Weta Workshop, and they started producing this game. They produced this game GKR, and then um, they made this road trip around America to promote it. And one of the designers dropped out last minute, and I was kind of the only person around Weta that was, board game mad, and everyone knew I was working on the Labyrinth board game and stuff. And you could push me in front of people, and I could talk. And so they go, Johnny, do you want to go on this 10-day road trip, visiting board game shops around America, and then end up at Gen Con? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing, right? And so I went on that trip, and after that trip, I was like, I'm a board gamer, like I've had my film experience. That was great. I'm never gonna feel about film. I can't think of a movie, unless Guillermo Del Toro directs The Island of Dr. Moreau, starring Ian McShane and Gary Oldman. Like I cannot think of a movie that is going to excite me more than board games. Like the last game I played in the whole full campaign of Star Wars Imperial Assault, right? You would have thought real men had just watched their rugby team win the World Cup. But me and my man children friends I literally went to a galaxy far, far away. I don't get that experience in a movie. And so me and this guy I was on this road trip on after 10 days of like discussing board games and what we would do differently and how we would do it and what our dreams were and stuff. By the end of that trip, we're like, you want to start a board gaming company? And then we did, because that's what crazy dreamers do. And we started Tabletop Troubadour Games. And Tabletop Troubadour Games was meant to be a board game company because I developed all of these assets. It wasn't just the Gloaming. I'm talking like intellectual property assets. I developed this world of the Gloaming and this world called Preschool Pirates and the Wandering Woods and all these things. And so all of the money and years you would pay to get art for a board game, I had about 5 board games fully illustrated in the bank. And then so we're going to look for some developers, and Ike became my business partner. I started making these modular gaming, medieval fantasy modular village gaming terrain just for myself, because like I started looking at some tabletop world buildings, and I was like, these are amazing. And so I add to cart, add to cart, add to cart, add to cart, and then the bill came to, like $1,600 or something, which was worth every penny. There might only be a couple of buildings, but like they demand that price because they're little works of art. You know what I mean? And like I wasn't turned off. I didn't think I was getting ripped off. I just felt, $1,600. If I put that towards molding silicon costs, I could just sculpt my own, right? 40 grand later, I start sculpting Hagglethorne Hollow. It wasn't called that at the time, but I start making the, and so, and because all, and like especially with Games Workshop, and this isn't a complaint because I understand it from a managerial point of view, I always found their walls like so thin. But you've got to get models in them. They've got to produce it in plastic. They've got to get it in a box. There's cost. There's weight. I mean, the terrain always feels a bit small, because if they made it any bigger, it would like completely shrink down the audience of the people that would buy it. So why produce it in the first place? There's so many factors to take into consideration when you're mass producing a product, right? But I was sculpting these buildings just for me. So the walls are massively thick and they're tilting and they're crumbling. And I knew what I could get away with molding it and casting it in silicon, because I've molded, casted in silicon, and produced like 50 life-size fairy fantasy creatures, right? So I knew what I could get away with these buildings, and it was only ever going to be for my personal gaming table. And so I'm making all these things, and then Ike sees these and it's like, well, we should put these online. I'm like, nobody's going to want these. Nobody wants this. But anyway, long story short, everyone knows we turned it into Hagglethorne Hollow, and the reason it was so popular is because like I had created something for myself because I couldn't find it online. It's like buildings, the walls are never thick enough, and I was like, well, you know what? If I'm going to spend all the time making and casting and painting this base, and then I build the roof to take off it, I've done this tile roof, but I could make a completely different building out of thatch or something that could go on this. And then I thought, actually, I could make a dungeon under it, and now I've got 6 different options. And it's like, this dungeon's cool. That's halfway towards a ruined castle. So I made a ruined castle in there. It's like, well, this works with that. And I start doing this kind of thing. I was like, and then I was like, okay, that's enough. Stop. Let's just get that online. I'm like, okay, but no one's going to want it. And then for us, anyway, for a 2-man thing, Hagglethorne Hollow like exploded. And then I just wanted to put, to make a little money on a quality product that we could use to fund our board game visions. But then we just became a full-on terrain making company, because we had to meet the demands of this runaway success, which became like basically a 3-year full-time job for me, which again put a 3-year gap between me kind of fulfilling what the Gloaming could be. But it had my head in tabletop gaming for 3 years. And I mean, and everything was going to be perfect and delivered on time, and then COVID hit, right? So most of the success of Hagglethorne Hollow really just went into absolutely delivering on the promise that we made, and we did. But it took so long, but just because of all of like the crushing things that COVID put on art directing a product globally, just changing a decision on something that might take 8 days could suddenly take 8 weeks, and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I'll always be quite proud of the fact that 2 guys pulled it off and completed this impossible promise of this modular gaming village on the table. And you see people's photos of it and people's experience of just opening a box and having a full medieval village on their table. And it looks impressive when people have it on the table, because again, it's the craziness behind it is if I'd started making Hagglethorn Hollow as a product, it wouldn't look anything like Hagglethorn Hollow. You know, it would be smaller, it would be thinner, it would be much more easy to produce and everything. All I did was make my dream fantasy village, and my dream fantasy village needs to look as good as the time they let me walk around the set of Lake Town, right? Because that reawoke gaming. You know what I mean? I want you to get your iPhone out, take a shot of it, and be like, which Peter Jackson movie is that from? You know what I mean? Like, that's the same aesthetic I put into the campaigns I art direct through printable scenery now, and so yeah, and so with my head so full and so just 24/7 omnipresent in the tabletop gaming world, the Gloaming that was going to be like a board game with miniatures, because I've always been obsessed with miniatures, always have been, since I saw HeroQuest at 6 or whatever, you know, just absolutely. And making my own miniatures now is just a dream come true, you know. And anyway, so I wanted kind of like a cool mini or not sort of a board game, kind of maybe like Zombicide meets HeroQuest kind of thing for the Gloaming. But then we just made a promise we wouldn't start developing any board games until everybody had Hagglethorn Hollow, and just COVID make that take forever. And so the Gloaming kind of just sat somewhere. But by that stage, I'd developed this relationship with Printable Scenery, who were making Hagglethorn Hollow into printable scenery. And then they asked me to come on board and start conceptually designing all of their campaigns. And I just learned it was a whole new world for me, because like in Hagglethorn Hollow, I can't make the beams sticking out too much because they're going to break off. And the beams had to be this amount of thickness to come out of the mold. So Hagglethorn Hollow, I love it. It looks great. I am proud of it. But you know, it's quite chunky. I love the chunkiness because for me, I call it Disney queue aesthetic. Like for someone like me, I love standing in the queue at Disneyland because how they've sculpted the interior of Indiana Jones's ride, or like Pinocchio's house. It looks like I've been shrunk down. It looks like I'm a gaming miniature walking around Warhammer terrain, right? And so I call it Disney queue aesthetic. And so I got all the Disney queue aesthetic into Hagglethorn Hollow. But there's a video on YouTube that I did, like the fisherman's hut has this little dragon's crest at the top of it. It took me 3 days to sculpt it this big. All of the stretch goals I unlocked that are statues of like, they come out this big. This big statues that you can run Hagglethorn Hollow. They took a week and a half each to sculpt because I sculpted them all this big, right? Because I wanted to get that detail in, because I'm not a digital sculptor. And then they got scanned and then 3D printed and molded and all this stuff. So that's how much it takes to, but with printable scenery, I can draw and art direct sculptors to put all of those sculptures and details and like, you know, Hagglethorn Hollow doesn't have any little nails. You might see those in Tabletop World or Games Workshop stuff, but I can, if I want nails, I art direct nails into it and stuff. So with what I learned from hand sculpting a full working medieval village, which has been absolutely crucial to now draw, design, foam card, art direct digital models to bring what I could do hand sculpting, because I demand that same level in the printable scenery that I art direct. But while also fighting the parameters of what really is feasible to print. Matt, who started and run printable scenery and has made this amazing company, he's in this situation where he's hired me to be this this is amazing. This will be amazing. And Matt's the closest person I've ever met to being like Richard Taylor, in the same sense that it's like, yes, rip into it. That'll be great, you know. And he gets really excited about my ideas, and he's got great ideas too. And we've learned the hard way a couple of times that the two of us left together can become our own worst enemy, because we just want to create this utterly unachievable thing, but it's actually a really amazing boon to what the company now delivers and provides, because we'll push something as far as it can go and go, okay, how can we make that? What do we do? We don't want to make concessions, but if we do make a concession, what could it be? But also, how could that step backwards make the model better rather than just be a step backwards?
Yeah.
And so it's just these. We just go nuts sometimes. We have some bad days, but the bad day is always about how do we make the absolute best model. And I'll stand by it. Like what printable scenery have been doing. Like you do compare it to some other printable scenery, and you can at first glance there's some campaigns that look great, but they're very simple square modeled stuff, and conceptually they're not really doing anything new that hasn't been done before. And so for what happens with printable scenery, because like I'm not just a designer, like anything I design in a printable scenery campaign I get on my table. Right. So I'm really designing for me, but fortunately, me as someone who wants really playable terrain that I can use through across multiple games, like and not just like genres. Like there's I've made printable scenery that I use as much in the Warhammer world as I do in the Star Wars world, because it's that kind of compatible. And I designed it specifically for that because I spend a lot of time painting and then elaborating on my printable scenery. So a bit of work than more than one time on the table. You know what I mean? So I think in the same way that Hagglethorn Hollow found its audience because I'd created something that didn't exist in the market, because it didn't exist in the market and I needed it, so I made it before I thought it would be a product. And that's why it found its audience. With printable scenery, I'm doing the same, and I'm pushing it farther than what I could do with Hagglethorn Hollow, because I have the means to detail things more beautifully through art directing fantastic digital artists. And then I've got a brain genius like Matt Barker, who is not telling me limitations, but reminding me, Johnny, you have these limitations. Our customers still have to print this. But then rather than, go, you're doing it wrong, it just creates these opportunities for Matt and I to have fun a lot of the time, challenge, problem solving the challenge, and not just how do we fix it, but how do we make the fix make the model better than before we had the problem.
Yeah.
And they're not huge problems, but the problem isn't printable scenery. The problem is my imagination and what I want to do.
Well, I was going to say that I took a look at one of your, I don't know if it was a printable scenery piece, but it's a giant turtle, and then you can put on the back.
Printable scenery.
It's pretty right, and then you've got the shell, and it's totally modular. So you can put the shell on the back, or you can put a howdah on top, and then you've got different levels to the howdah that you can take on and put on and take off. It's I can't even conceive of how you would actually like imagine that. Like physically, do you use like acetates to draw the different levels, or how do you create that level of modularity in a design that's so complex?
Do you like edit and pause these videos? Because I can go grab it.
Sure, yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Okay, 1 second, I'll be right back. So, okay. He comes with a spare shell, but I left the shell in my studio. But so what can happen is, he's better looking this way. So you can have just the shell, right? And that shell can be in the water, or the shell can be this boat. So you could be playing a game of D&D, and you've got these guys on a raft, or they go to the shell like it's an island, and then it can lift up. The model now has nubs that secure it, but so then it's this big guy here, and so like I collect the new Games Workshop Swampy Orcs,
right.
and so this works for that, but it also works for D&D, and obviously it's going to be a big feature of the story of the Gloaming. But then, so these are all the different features you've got. You can have this little kind of Oregon Trail looking thing, or you can hold on, which way does this go? Yeah, that can go there, and then that can go on there as well, like that. or you could just get silly with it and put that on there. You can have a flat roof like that, or which way they go? This goes this way. Yeah, on there, and then this can go up on there, and then they've made all these designed. This is like a resin print. That's one print.
Right. Wow.
I love scatter terrain and I love clutter. Anyway, so that's like the full Fascallian thing there. You
like
could print a bunch of those, just make it a goblin camp or whatever. But
so how do
yeah,
you
so
how do you design that then? So because you've got so many different levels, is it just about? I mean, I guess it's just making sure that there's certain points that are always the contact between levels and stuff.
that's what's really cool about printable scenery is that like they because they make sure everything has to print easily for the customer. And they want to the more the company grows, the more it wants to do more than what every printable scenery company does, which is quite squarish boxes, accessible buildings, which absolutely have their place, and that's where everyone started and everything. But technology moves forwards, and we want to just keep pushing how good printable scenery can be, and we want to get it to. I think it's at like a Games Workshop level now, and but they have lots of test prints, and I always, and they just stack up, and the studio is only so big, and I'm like, as a kit basher and a model maker, I just give it to me, and so first of all, the Fascallian design already existed, and we've had a printable scenery. We've for a long time. We've been slowly building up what gloaming things are released in printable scenery campaigns, because we can't just do like here's the whole world of the gloaming printable scenery campaign, because it's not people's problem right now to understand exactly what the gloaming is and just jump on board, because it's not like a Middle-earth IP as such yet, because we're about to everything you need to know about the gloaming we're working on to release to the world next year with this monster manual and then the follow-up campaign, because it's that much work has been put into it that it will be that kind of fleshed out. Everything is visually represent, and so the doing a campaign about the swamps being so naturalistic and everything was a great way to start including some gloaming creature models that we could make accessible for the gaming module. And the Fascallian was one I really pushed for, because I thought it would really feed well into the printable scenery side of things. Not that whole thing isn't resin. That's from the FDM printer, and that's how good they are now. The detail is just fantastic, and I love the idea of a piece of living terrain, gaming terrain. So like when gaming terrain can have its own rules, is one thing, but when it can actually move across the tabletop and affect a game, and nothing's better than a giant Fascallian turtle creature. And that's always inspired me since the poem Fascallian and the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, Tolkien book of collected poems and short stories. No, Tales from a Perilous Realm, of which the Tom Bombadil story is in, but there's a poem not related to Tom Bombadil called Fascallian. I was like, look, there goes Fascallian, an island good to land upon, sort of thing. And it's about these sailors that go land on an island, but it turns out it's this giant Fascallian. And I think somewhere along the line, when I developed the gloaming, I thought of it as a turtle, which may have lent back into never-ending story vibes as a kid, because again, any movie with a creature in it was my jam. Anyway, so we had the turtle, we had the Fascallian design, and then I basically just drew it in pencil, that the whole thing you saw there. Right. But when we started printing it, I found I could holding it physically from the test prints, And the test prints are like, okay, this is good, but we need to make this angle more 45 degrees so there's no stringing, and we don't need supports when we print it, and whatever issues arise. Okay, that's cool. We'll redesign this, that. Now it prints and the design still looks good, awesome. But with these test prints, I was able to hacksaw this and cut that and resculpt that and look at the pieces differently and realize, hey, there's actually a couple more options. The sculpting's already been done, the model's already been made. But if we separate it here, tilt this bit here, if we just cut this bit off this, add it to this bit, and with one more beam here or whatever, I've got like two whole more options. I can reconfigure this thing, and we've just increased the playability. And they're like, okay, sure. And so then through learning that, through tactically holding and playing with this monster, I can then go back and art direct the team and that's just going to be a surprise for people that have already backed it, because we didn't show that on the Kickstarter because we hadn't learned it by then. On the Kickstarter, that whole thing was some pencil illustrations,
Right.
and then printable is great. It is the true definition of what Kickstarters are meant to be. Like the more people that come and back our Kickstarters, whether it's printable scenery or the new monster manual, you genuinely are actively and personally helping make the product better and bigger. I like, outside of tabletop gaming, I'm not, like, say if you made like a new camera tripod or something and put it on Kickstarter, I'm not sure how more funding could make that camera tripod better than it already is. You know what I mean? But like board games, like, I love backing a cool mini or not board game and checking in each new morning going, oh, I've unlocked that character. They're great games, but I can't say I even play them that much. I just love all the minis. Like for me, like the Zombicide Black Plague games, I have got to the table a few times and loved every minute of it. But I'm collecting those for NPCs for my Dungeons and Dragons games because that miniature's great. Anyway, so like Kickstarter, especially with printable scenery, like every stretch goal unlocked, I mean that's all pouring money back into the product. It's not going in an Uncle Scrooge money bank tower that we swim in. It's just like, okay, great, that we can make more models and more models, and you see the amount of stretch goals that we unlock and deliver. Yeah, it's a stressful, busy time for me, but I love getting more and more opportunities to design something that's going to end up on my tabletop, because again, I know if I'm designing it for me, it's going to appeal to people because like I'm trying to design the best tabletop gaming terrain because that's what I demand for my table, because I'm very, very, very picky. I won't ever play with an unpainted miniature or an unfinished piece of terrain. Like my table needs to look like a film set before a dice rolls, and the level of quality I demand from the actual finished product that comes out of printable scenery is really high, which is great because I've teamed up with the right people because they know what they're doing. And it's been a real thrill to I found it the most creatively freeing design job I've ever had in my life, working with printable scenery and being able to express my world building ideas through that. And then so at the moment, because I'm now, I work for printable scenery and I'm building this monster menu so much, our house has a studio at the back, which I'd show you, but we don't get Wi-Fi out there, because it's down the garden, and you'll cut it. But I've been for 4 years building this massive landscape. But when I was I'm 39, but when I was 20 working on King Kong, I had this dream that one day I'll own a place where I have a room where I can permanently make my own like Skull Island landscape with this rock. And now I have it, and like I art directed the dinosaur fantasy Dungeons and Dragons thing through Weta. The reason why I made it Dinosaurs Dungeons and Dragons is so they could produce the same rock that they hadn't done since King Kong. So I could get some of that rock to make this landscape for the Gloaming. They'd be I wasn't cheating anybody because they got a great IP, right? And then I got the great rock that I desperately needed to fulfill my vision. And so I've been building that landscape. And at the moment, I started a Patreon where, because I build all of these things all week long, right? And now I document the process and make it into tutorials on my Patreon. And it's this lovely, warm, welcoming little group of fellow makers that share their stuff, and they get a kick out of what I'm doing, and it's doing well enough now that I mean it's a small project for me that I enjoy sharing with people, but rather than just put the money on groceries or power bills or whatever, I've saved up enough of it that I'm now 1 day a week paying a friend of mine to be my apprentice to help me basically make more content for the Patreon. So it's a snake eating its tail, fulfilling that promise to people. But so I can still keep spinning the stupid amount of plates I'm spinning, but have truly like a dedicated day where the port city that I'm building in my studio, which has all sorts of fantastical elements, from a woodrose forest to a crumbling port to a portal cave and just kind of a dwarven mine system and a shipping lane and all this stuff. I'm 4 years into the build and I'm probably a year away from finishing it. So now today he was helping me just paint branches on trees. But so I'm now able to fuel that investment from people back into the terrain making content that I've really been enjoying giving people, and I just I one of the last things what was cool about it is when I first did my video with Adam Savage with the whole landscape untested, so many comments were like, how did you make those trees? How did you make those trees? And I never felt like I could tell people about it because I made those trees by collecting off-cut foliage snippets from the miniatures department of King Kong 20 years ago. And they no longer produce that product. I've looked everywhere for years over it, and you can't find it anywhere. And then I had to make it out of woodland scenics and stuff like that. Like, I could never sell them. They'd be worth like $1,000 a tree, and even then I'd be like out of pocket. You know what I mean? And it's like, so I'm not going to be going. It's like, here's how I do it. You can't. So I thought, why bother? But so recently, on my Patreon, one of my patrons spent a long time researching and looking, and he's found an equivalent product that now we're workshopping into making a commercial viable product for people to finally be able to make trees the same way I did at test from the tester videos. But so everyone will be able to do it, but at like a viable cost.
Yeah.
And not this cripplingly stupid, what was I thinking, Johnny cost, and so I just used some of that product that we've been developing to, I took a whole bunch of test prints from some of the Gloaming trees and made like these towering Dagobah trees, because I'm starting, Dagobah is one of the last planets I haven't tackled from the original trilogy for my Legion setups. And then once I finish that, all I've got to make is Jabba's Palace, and that'll be it. No more Star Wars. But
you saved the toughest one for last there as well.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, unless they make I tell you what, the one thing about more recent Star Wars content is even if the films or the shows aren't that great, and some of them are amazing, but even the bad ones, the one thing that gets better and better and better with Star Wars are the sets. They're just glorious. Like I remember seeing Rogue One, and when they go to Jeddah, it was like how George, first name basis, how George would have done Tatooine if he had the budget, and it's like Jeddah absolutely warped my mind. See, that's another person that just came through Weta randomly one day. You're working at your desk and you turn around and it's like, oh, that's interesting. There you go. Bye. That's George Lucas. What do you do? That stuff happens all the time. Anyway, yes. So that is the full 5-hour story of how I went from watching Labyrinth to making tabletop gaming terrain.
And it's an amazing story, Johnny. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned just whilst you were talking there, you mentioned that the gloaming, the campaign setting, and the monster manual, they're coming to Kickstarter next year. Is that the plan?
Yeah, we're starting with the monster manual, and the monster manual will have a. I think it's getting past the point of being able to call it a one shot, but I don't know how much I can say, but the monster manual is designed so you can plug any of these. I'm not boasting when I say amazing because of the work Matt Roush has done creating the stats for them and everything. Like, it's these amazing characters you can plug into any of your existing campaigns if you've been playing for 6 or 10 years. You know what I mean? It's just this real asset of fantastic creatures that you won't have already. But there's also going to be your first kind of introduction into the gloaming and how you play there, what you can expect there. And so if the monster manual itself, you can play kind of like, a full D&D with. It's not just monster stats. There's a campaign element in it as well, which is the kind of introductory kind of teaser's the wrong word because it's good. Teasing sounds mean. It's more of an exciting whatever. It's your first taste of what's to come in the campaign book, which the monster manual will obviously complement perfectly, but the campaign book will also have a whole world of new characters due to the nature of the world we're creating in the gloaming and outside of the gloaming, and it's going to be amazing what you're going to be able to do, like with taking resources from the gloaming and what you can build with them outside of that realm to help you to keep going and more or less exploiting that natural resource. It's story-wise, I mean, working on it for a long time, and it's really exciting how it's developing. And the story is developed in a way that I couldn't be happier with, but it could only have happened through letting go of it as a novel and exploring it as what can be an active player participant role through Dungeons and Dragons and role playing. But so basically, like, what would happen if a portal to the Fey world was opened, in a medieval setting, and basically, it's kind of the fantasy version of Deadwood, whereas there's like a gold rush, and then it's nobody really owns the land, and so it's open to every scumbag willing to make their claim through violence or any sort of means. And so very, very quickly, an entire settlement springs up around this resource. For Deadwood, it's gold. For the gloaming, it's this portal to another world, right? But like Deadwood is very dangerous because of the Native Americans who aren't very interested in letting these people take their land, and all sorts of internal horrors of just human nature within the settlement. The gloaming is an incredibly dangerous place, and so it's kind of like adventurers wanted. There's this settlement that is the resources they're taking out of the gloaming, they're getting shilled to the shops that have been established outside of this portal, and the most rickety, no building permit, nobody's calling any shots kind of a way. So it's kind of like it's Deadwood meets District 9 meets Jim Henson's The Storyteller, with kind of an Ankh-Morpork kind of vibe, and because I'm really fascinated with, like, you might be able to make your own trade and the resources, but and you can build your standing up in the community. So you keep going in and out and of the gloaming, but because it's this rich world full, it's not just the creatures, it's the ecology and the medicinal properties, or potion like qualities that can be distilled back in Gloaming Port once you've resourced these. But of course, the Gloaming doesn't want you to resource these. It's it's gonna fight back. Like the Gloaming doesn't want to be colonized, and it's full of pretty tough, scary creatures that in themselves are their own commodity. Like think of the fur trade in America and how like things like beavers and buffaloes were almost like hunted to extinction because it's like, hey, I'll get myself some skin, I'm making a money, and and those people aren't necessarily bad people. It's a tough times making a wage in a harsh world. Do you know what I mean? And what the Gloaming campaign is really going to do is play with the ethics of and the morality of the choices you make. Like D&D is full of like, you go into the layer, there's a minotaur, I killed a minotaur. It's like, well, now you're going to learn about the minotaur's family and what gap you've left in the Gloaming from that, and what the consequences of that are going to be on a bigger perspective. And there's no longer this resource here, and this person in town actually breeds minotaurs, blah blah blah. There aren't minotaurs in the Gloaming. I'm not C.S. Lewis just picking anything from there. But I mean, just for example, you know what I mean? It's like because the Gloaming is so fleshed out, and I know it so well. It every action is going to have a consequence, but also because printable scenery and myself have developed such a, it's going to be almost using every single piece of printable scenery terrain that I've helped develop with them in the last 4 years. So we're looking at creating a system where you can have statistics for actual buildings, finished buildings and ruined buildings, or perhaps you can even make your own base within the community of the Gloaming Port based on what you've traded, and you can build your standing up through a building, your own guild itself, and the different relationships between shop vendors, and trading with that person might disqualify you to trade with this person. And then the raids that are happening on Gloaming Port through bands of ogres and hobgoblins coming from the other side that are trying to just destroy the people that have been destroying them. And but what's really fascinating for me about Gloaming Port is like woodwoses that were kind of getting hunted to the point of extinction. They're kind of getting an opportunity to almost have like a reservation on the man side, and so it's basically work with our enemies or get killed, and so there's a community of the fairy folk that are also in the Gloaming Port, and which is fascinating and equally depressing and relevant to real world situations, but also creates all sorts of interesting character dynamics and relationships. But and it also creates we've designed those people to be new playable races that haven't been created before, so you could play as woodwoses or guardian gnomes and other things like that. But they're also they could be mercenaries for hire that your party can take into the Gloaming, and you'll be able to get better rolls and statistics in terms of foraging and perception and stuff, because they're natives to that land. And so anything that can be thought about has been thunk about, and I just I can't be more excited about it's the world I've always wanted to visit. It's the culmination of every creative experience that has excited me and influenced me. It's the culmination of what I learned from working from Del Toro, Spielberg, Peter Jackson, Richard Taylor, especially. It's how Labyrinth made me feel. It's how Terry Pratchett's Guards books made me feel. Why did they make me feel like that? What is it that I'm trying to encapsulate there? Why do I lose 2 hours sleep a night thinking about Mordheim when I should be getting rest? What is it? What is it? What is it about Games Workshop mythology that is as astounding to me as Tolkien's? Because my job is, a lot of it is autopilot for 8 hours a day. Sometimes, I'm lost in my head a lot, and I use that time to think about why I love the things I do, what that means to me, and how I can. I kind of think of myself as like a creative whiskey distillery or something, like you pour in the different things that catalyst and boil and brew up, and all of that stuff distills into little drops of this liquor, and for me the gloaming is the creative liquor, the creative spirit of Labyrinth and Mordheim and Pratchett and Gilliam and Tolkien and Henson and Phil Tippett and Ralph McQuarrie and the vision of pre-90s George Lucas and just everything is kind of boiled up in some Willy Wonka Gene Wilder machine that is just dripping the gloaming monster manual,
Yeah.
And it's like Hagwith and Hollow. It's all for me. I'm creating the thing I absolutely want the most, and I assume and hope, because I'm a passionate gamer and know what I want to see through gaming, that it will find its audience in the same way that Hagwithorn did, or some of my printable scenery stuff did, or yeah. So it's
I mean,
it's just been a fun creative project.
I have no doubt at all that it will find that audience, because it's incredible stuff what you've put together so far. Your passion is so evident in how you talk about it, and all of those influences have come together into something really, really quite magical from what I've seen. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm really looking forward to seeing it fully fleshed out in the books, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. I will put some links in the description below for you as well, so people can find you and find out more about it.
And you're probably the only person that knows, but you're in it. You've featured in Gloaming Port. We've made a miniature of you.
I wasn't going to say. I didn't want to. I didn't know if it was my place to.
We didn't discuss it, but the thing, and that's right here. You can see that here. This is a miniature that's going to be in the next campaign. We've made Jordan into, I guess you'd call it like a warrior priest in terms of a Mordheim warband, but I just, for me, like because the gloaming is attracting all sorts of people and all sorts of adventurers, and I definitely think some of them would be like, you're going to get like the barbarian gruntos that just want to go in and fight a dragon and kill an ogre, but there's also going to be, I really wanted to cater to the more like Charles Darwin like people. And since you're like the lore master of all things board games and games workshops, you've got like, you're holding a Warhammer, but you've also got your book. So you're there learning everything about the gloaming, but you've got a Warhammer because you really do need to have weapons on your own, and you've got a cat familiar with you as well. So it's just like everything about you captured in something as big as your thumb.
So another reason to be super excited about it. Yeah, I'm very looking forward to it.
Also, I know he's going to be the perfect little ship captain for your Marienburg warband as well. Yeah. So we'll send you a painted copy when he's off.
I'm excited. I cannot wait. I really cannot wait. I'm looking forward to it for that and for the entire thing, because I think it's going to be really fun. But cool. Thank you, Johnny, for taking so much time out to talk to me. I've really enjoyed it. I think that's been fascinating. So thank you again.
I feel like I've just run my mouth off the whole time, and
that's what it's about. That's absolutely what it's about.
Right. Well, it's been a pleasure. I love your show, and I always check if there's another video when I log onto YouTube before I go to look for anything else, because it's just always reliable, enjoyable content to get creative to.
Thank you. Thank you, Johnny, for spending the time to chat with me. I had an incredible time, just really, really good fun. Loads of awesome stuff. Fantastic, just absolutely brilliant. I thought that was terrific. If you want to find out more about all of Johnny's work, I have put some links in the description below. Go and check out the Gloaming. as Johnny says, I will be appearing in miniature form next year in the Gloaming, and I cannot wait to see how it turns out. I'm so excited about it. But all of Johnny's stuff is just amazing. Well worth whiling away a few hours just looking at his incredible work. It's great. It's just really good. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to see more of this kind of stuff here on the channel, do let me know in the comments below, and you can support me via Patreon, via Ko-fi, or just by joining my Discord, and there's links for all of those in the description as well. Thank you again to Johnny. Thank you for watching. I am Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.